All right, welcome to the Saturday stream, as I'm calling it, Saturday night with me, Nick Dixon, and of course, Simon Roberts. How you doing, Simon?
Good evening, Nick. Good evening, chat. Very, very pleased to be here again as the summer fades amidst balmy evening twilights. The nightingale trills warmly and gives gentle way to the proud English tradition of blood and screaming that is the Notting Hill Carnival as it approaches, portending a bittersweet farewell to another year of lies and ever-increasing financial costs.
What a beautiful intro. See, It is like a proper old school radio show, this, guys. And it's a Saturday night, and it's a regular thing. And I was just thinking of that song, Saturday Night, Blue Nile. Do you know that one?
I don't.
There's also Another Saturday Night, and I ain't got nobody. Perhaps that one's more apt. By Sam Cooke. What is your favorite Saturday song, chat and Simon? This is the kind of light-hearted. This is kind of like Radio 2 sloth we're doing.
Absolutely. Well, this is interesting. I saw someone on there's a thread on Twitter yesterday. People, bemoaning the loss of things like Radio 4 because they used to love and listen to Radio 4, and now they can't because we have to hate the BBC, and we do hate the BBC richly and fulsomely as they deserve. But there is a sense in which the intimacy of radio has vanished because it's so tainted.
Absolutely. And we're bringing that back with the dulcet tones, as we discussed the other day.
Oh, yes.
Simon Roberts and the singing of Nick Dixon. The song and dance man is what I really am.
Pouring. Go ahead. No, nothing. We're just pouring the balm into your ears because you're bereft of quality political analysis on Saturday nights, and this is why we bring to you all the joy of the latest interviews, views, and you can wallow in the technocratic musings of Dominic Cummings.
Yes, in a way, it's not an obvious Saturday night thing, but I was thinking about doing two of the most controversial men in the world. So controversial, I can't even say their names. And we could have reacted to their stream, but I was thinking, will that get banned for many reasons? Will the original guy who posted it zappers? Will YouTube zappers? And I thought after we got zapped into oblivion with our Frost Nixon? Nah, Frost Power. So I thought, why not get zapped this time with a safe one?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, as you say, we can autistically pursue every scintilla of new thought that comes into Dominic's head, because he does do it slightly differently in each interview. So we're just waiting for the newest twitch on the thread of the Cummings intellect.
Yes, and I love how we're autistically just covering every interview he does in a way where he should be slightly scared if we show up at his house one day. Are you those completely crackers people that cover all my interviews? You're completely crackers.
He drives off screaming, "You're a mentalist," or something like that.
You're a mentalist.
Alan Partridge style.
Yeah. He's a mentalist. If you want to get involved as well, you can play the Dominic Cummings game, which is every time he says completely, you deport a migrant. That's the game tonight. So, or take a drink. I don't mind. Which, but I'm not a drinker, so I have to just.
You see, your accents are very good. There was a little subtle Durham inflection there when you said completely. I mean, I'm from County Cleveland, which used to be, and then it was taken away and called County Durham again, and now it's County Cleveland again. But that was a very little subtle touch that I can't actually do, even though I was born not very far from Dominic Cummings.
How strange.
Completely.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to mimic the way he says it because he's from Durham, but he's got a slight posh. He's been around posh people a lot, but he still has that completely. It still has that like slight thing in there. And I would just say completely. You see, it's a very different way of saying it, completely. But he would say and that's the key difference. And there's also the accent. Yeah, so we'll be doing a lot of that.
Do you have a heavy Kendall accent? I mean, or do you moderate it for broadcast purposes like we do?
Well, I was only born in Kendal, and then I grew up in Grasmere. I used to have a much stronger accent. We'd say nout and a up and larlin, and it'd be a lot more like that. But I noticed it unfortunately just went over time from being in South for so long.
Yeah.
So it's upsetting, but hey, but people like to listen. People have even said we both have good voices, Simon. So that's good. Mine's not as good as yours, but
we try. Yeah, we try. We give you a luxurious balm orally. Not orally, orally.
Aural,
yeah.
Let's get that clear. Okay, I'm actually going to test the sound because of all the autists in the chat. Because last time it was too quiet. That's because it was an upload from a raw video, not raw in that sense, but raw, and it was from my computer. Now this one we're streaming straight from YouTube, and I thought therefore it would be a lot louder. But actually, I listened to this one today. It is just very quiet. This is just a very quiet video compared to all other videos on YouTube. My ears were suddenly exploded when I moved to another video. Someone's saying sounds good, but no, we haven't done the test yet, guys. So this will be the test.
Most of the people
So the question is, how is the video compared to us?
coming in was deliberate and legal, intellectual, kind of psychological, emotional environment.
That is as loud as it will go. So let us know. Yeah, low. So the only way to deal with that is if we go quiet as well, then you turn us all up. That's the only. But then other people are saying we're perfect, so I don't know what to do.
Well, we do sound fine like this, but I think we're going to sound very loud. So if people turn, I mean, as I was saying to Nick before the stream, we don't make any allowances for the disabled. Do turn your stream up if you can't hear.
Yeah, because that's as loud as it. I don't know how to get it any louder. My computer's on full volume, which doesn't affect. Anyway, the YouTube's on full volume.
I could pull away from the microphone slightly, maybe. I don't know.
No, we can only go. We're gonna have to go lower, Simon. So I'm gonna put us lower as we did last time and see if that works.
That's fine.
I'm gonna crank us manually down to even 50. We went down to
because we want to optimize your listening experience. We want our voices to be as silk.
And we are, but Cummings isn't silk. So how about that? Now put us down to 50, and so therefore you guys will turn up exactly as Wax Factor is saying. So maybe we'll be
Most
more.
of the people coming in was deliberate.
Well, maybe we'll be more in line with that now. We've turned everyone down.
Let us know in the chat if you can.
Let us know, but not in
that was any better
way. We might even ever do the stream. So yeah, folks at home, raise your levels. We've lowered ours, and hopefully it'll.
Tolerable, says Chris.
Because there's no way to test that. There's no way to test how it sounds, their manners. I don't see any way to test that, or I would do it. Everyone knows on my my podcast, everything is very, it's tested and careful. But anyway, AA saying we could have done that stream that I didn't want to do, but maybe we'll do it with him another time.
Yeah, I think
it's still quiet comparably. I don't know what to do about that. Then I really don't know what to do. It's just a very quiet video, so we'll do our best. And we can even go down a bit more on our side if you want. But should we crack on?
Nick, I just want to draw your attention to a super chat so it doesn't get lost in the melee. That has a gastroenterology question.
Okay. Well, should we take it now then, or
I'm just curious as to what it's about.
So it's AJ98. Apologies for puerile SC, but perhaps super Simon could verify claims made in the comments on the AC Politics Joe video, given his gastroenterology background.
I will do so post haste after the stream. I don't know what it's referring to.
AC.
Is it the Adam Curtis Politics Joe? He had a recent interview where he it was quite a good format actually. He had some footage of him wandering around BBC Television Centre when it was abandoned in 2012, and the interview was the audio was overlaid over that. So it's quite interesting. If you want to go and look at that Adam Curtis interview, you can see inside the dreaded donut of Television Centre just after it was evacuated of all those lovely people at the BBC.
Okay. Well, thank you for the super chat, as always. Let's go and see what it's like then with this vol and see what the interview is much better than that other one we did. It was really boring. I do promise you that. So, and we still made that one good. So, and they've got this cool bit at the start.
Most of the people coming in was deliberate and legal because the Conservative Party said, we actually want to do this.
Politicians have been able to use mass low-skill immigration to solve specific problems, like the social care problem, and generally the economy runs on low-skill migration.
The thing about Brexit was...
All right, and I should just say that's Jacob Reynolds, and the other guy, they got Mick Hume in there, who's a journalist. Jacob Reynolds does some sort of job at the Russell something, well, it's not that important, and Dominic Cummings. I mean, I didn't need to stop there because I didn't exactly know their exact roles either, but let's carry on.
It was not done by the Conservative Party. It was done to the Conservative Party. Vote Leave was not a Conservative thing. The Conservative Party leader, David Cameron, was very firmly on the other side, as was the official party. So I think that also is a clue, right? Like by far the biggest, most important thing done in a, quote, conservative, unquote, direction was not done by the Conservative Party, but done to the Conservative Party. And that fact also is part of the reason why they struggled so much to cope with it, and why after we won the referendum, they essentially spent 3 years just going into a tailspin and driving the country into a biggest constitutional crisis in a century, because it wasn't their idea. They didn't want to do it. And therefore, once they started having meetings with Whitehall officials about what to do, they ended up just completely paralyzed. I think
gotta stop. I mean, One, because he said completely about a
Mm.
million times already. Two, to give you just, the other guy, Jacob Reynolds, is head of policy at MCC Brussels, whatever that is. Mick Hume's a journalist who had something to do with Spiked and is a kind of, I don't know, got a sort of libertarian, well, some people say libertarian Marxist background, which is that weird mixture. But just on Cummings there, one thing that's so obvious, but which I hadn't thought about, or it just kind of reminded me of it more, is the idea that the Brexit was done to the Tories, not by them. And if you read books like All Out War, Tim Shipman, you do get a strong sense that, I mean, of course it was. Cameron said, let's have the referendum reluctantly. He didn't want to, and then was against his own party, which is so bizarre. But if you think of the Tory Euroskeptic wing as a kind of separate party called like the Skeptic Party or something, then it makes much more sense. The Tories have always been this, or long been this disaster. And really what happened there was it was a separate party in all but name who were completely against the main party on the issue of Europe. And they were so determined on that issue. It's just a pity that we have been totally cucked on other issues. So people like Steve Baker have gone woke. Daniel Hannan is tweeting the other day that he hates mobs, right? Because he's confronted with some working class people in Epping and he can't take it. So my contention is it wasn't in a way even the Tories. It was a particular wing of the Tories who almost became like a separate party. And that now those people have kind of disappeared again, except for people like Cummings who are still fighting the fight. But most of them are too cooked on any issue post-Brexit.
Yeah. And I think the two things there. One, Dominic said 3 years. It was 3.5 years. I remember every bitter second of the way, as I said before, they tortured us in Parliament with these nonsensical meaningful votes and so on. And the other thing is the Conservative Party always seems to be sabotaged by its own high sense of propriety. This sense that anything to do with this expression of nationalistic fervour is somehow slightly disgraceful, and so they have to advocate for it in a highly principled way, like you say, the ERG, the Spartans, so called. But on every other position, they have to completely collapse and subsume their views to the sort of warm gloop of Tory policy, and that's how it's done with those guys.
Yeah, and if you read about Brexit, this was, I mean, Baker ended up in tears. It was this horrible thing, them rebelling all that time. They found it traumatic. But I'm sure it's not easy to do. But then you look at how there's so much more we need to do, and they're so not ready for it. Only an absolute nutter like Cummings, I'm saying that in a good way, is ready to carry on fighting this fight and take it to the next level. But they've all sort of tapped out.
The core. So I think there's a couple of core things to answer your question. Number one, you have to think about the intellectual and kind of psychological, emotional environment. Most Conservative MPs have been essentially since 2010 on the same side as Tony Blair and the Labour Party on almost all important issues, on the economy, on public services, on crime, on immigration, on the ECHR, on net zero, on Brexit. So that's the first thing. They're called Conservative, but essentially what they mean is go in the same direction as the left, but in a slightly different way and with different people in charge. Secondly,
Pause.
At the core is.
Do you just want to consider that again? That's we can paraphrase what he's saying there in the traditional form of conservatism. What is it? Just socialism going at the speed limit, etc. That kind of thing. And the other thing there about the wish to emulate Blair, wasn't it allegedly Michael Gove or someone who came in with one of Blair's writings and passed it round, his memoirs, I think, at some point, and said, this is the kind of way we have to go. And people have observed before that this is a sort of the classic mistake that they made was they thought as individual MPs they all had to become like Blair, whereas the message perhaps Gove may have taken from it more appropriately was they had to govern in the ruthless manner of Blair, noting when they had to eject their radicals, for example, and when they had to haver to and listen to the electorate and so on, not become puppets slavishly trying to sound like Blair.
Yeah, and you've reminded me now that Michael Gove said something really disgusting about, really sort of cringe about Blair. I can't remember what exactly it was. He praised Blair, but in a really weird way. Oh yeah, he said, I love Tony. I think I can actually find the article. If you go back to
I seem to remember this. Yeah.
2003, I can't fight my feelings anymore. I love Tony.
Yeah.
So, I mean, imagine that. I mean, was that when he was just a Times writer? I can't remember when he started in politics, but still, he just went on about how he loved Blair. Quite disturbing stuff. Yeah, they're all stuck in the Blairite agenda.
Yeah.
And
Huge in the
maybe,
chat says these are Peter Hitchens' assertions.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, well, Hitchens was way ahead, calling the Tories socialists and saying they were all the same, and talking about bourgeois bohemians, which
That's it.
which
Yes.
I always think about. And
Both.
someone in the chat, Wax Factor said, I think it was him, said, oh yeah, here we are, all children of autumn, we need winter warriors. I just appreciated the Spengler reference. But of course, in Spengler terms, we've been in a decline for sort of hundreds of years. You know,
Yeah.
the periods of decline are so much longer. It's not like Blair. It's like it goes back to like centuries.
Yeah, it is important though to keep emphasizing this. I mean, there is confusion sometimes, just as there was when you remember Nigel Farage, was it, who said he admired Putin, and people obviously were knocking themselves over to try and amplify this as some sort of endorsement of Vladimir Putin. In the same way, you can admire the fact that Tony Blair is a ruthlessly effective, the dominating political operator of the last 25 years. It doesn't mean you have to get engaged to the guy. You don't have to love what he represents personally, but you've got to admire the fact that he is incredibly competent, and we live in a desert of competence.
Absolutely. And if you haven't watched it yet, go to my David Starkey interview, currently on 217.8 thousand views. And at the start of that trailer, Starkey says, and in the interview, he says, I hate Blair, but Blair was a genius. Starmer isn't.
Yes.
So evil genius, as we know, Dark Lord, some might say. Yeah, and of course, you can call someone like Putin smart. I mean, Trump's always say, hey, smart guy, but great. And she as well. He's talking about G. By the way, smart guy. You know, it doesn't mean like, oh, you love them.
Yeah.
Although, having said that, when Gove says it about Blair, it is gross.
Yeah. Well, you've got to be Michael Corleone on this. Don't hate your enemies. It clouds your vision.
Don't hate your enemies. We're going to keep doing impressions.
That what's happened in Britain over a period of more than a century is the gradual ending of the old ministerial responsibility to Parliament, which was the foundation of the British Constitution, and its replacement by a permanent class of officials in Whitehall who have most of the power. So if you look now, say, at the Cabinet Secretary is not really covered by the media at all, but the Cabinet Secretary is 100 times more powerful than any normal British government minister, apart from the Prime Minister himself. He actually controls the personnel system, the hiring and the promotion and compensation for hundreds of thousands of people in Whitehall. That's real power. That power used to be exercised by by political forces responsible to Parliament. So as that power has shifted, it also means that over a very long period of time, you have this phenomenon whereby the political parties and MPs talk a lot of stuff in the old media about what they think and what they're going to do, but it bears less and less resemblance to anything real when they're in power, when they just continue to do what the bureaucratic institutions want to do. And you can see that happening now with Starmer, right? Starmer promises change, promises a fundamental change of direction. And now, a year later, Labour MPs are scratching their heads and saying, why does it seem like we're in charge, but the government is just continuity Rishi Sunak? This seems quite baffling to us. But the core reason is because the ministers are not fundamentally in charge of the government. The officials are in charge of the government, and the meetings that the ministers are in are essentially Potemkin meetings that are all scripted.
Pause. Just to say, I had a bit of pushback on that when I related it in tweets. One of my followers took issue with the idea that the meetings are scripted. I believe what Cummings is saying. Is there a question of whether he's exaggerating? To make a case because of the way he was cold-shouldered when he was in Downing Street. I don't know. But as I say, I think there perhaps was reason. One of the things I think is fortunate in a sense, this period that we've endured since Brexit is the fact that we've had so many changes of government and so many changes of prime minister that it's concentrated people's attention on what Cummings is talking about, this dissonance between what the politicians promise you and then once they get into office, what they then signally fail to do. And the idea that because of the rapid changes of cabinet that we've had, you've had a great deal of incompetence shipped straight into the cabinet room, and so the idea that the meetings are scripted is probably a practical concern from the civil service, in my view. They probably do set things out, for people to sort of handhold them through the process of running cabinet. And then what happens is the politicians tend to go, oh, well, this is lovely. All of our meetings are scripted. I just read my script. I go in, I go out, smile for the camera, and that's my job done. Actually, I'll probably continue to do that. And in the meantime, as Cummings often says, I'll pay more attention to the 24-hour news cycle and whether I've got a slot on the Today programme tomorrow morning, because that sense of narcissistic vanity is what I'm really about.
Yes, I take your point. Although, yeah, you were perhaps too lenient to them. Cummings is very much the other side. He's like, and by the way, Potemkin's the other drinking game with Dominic Cummings. Potemkin, he'll say at least once per interview, probably a few times. And he'll completely Potemkin. If he says those two together, that's the royal flush. So completely crackers Potemkin meetings is if he says the completely crackers pathological Potemkin regime. That's the ultimate.
He is very good on this kind of sense of the insanity of what goes on. He'll talk about, and then the MOD had this meeting with the civil service and they just thought this was completely mad, and everybody is reacting as this is all completely mad. It's not just him. He creates the sense of lots of groups in government are utterly baffled by the way they're confounded by the institutional civil service that, he was referring to there, as being adopted after the Northcote-Trevelyan report in 1854, the idea of the permanent impartialized civil service.
Yes, I suppose we should crack on because we only made it through 3 minutes 57, but I do want to say
Excellent.
I accidentally did an impression of The Godfather when you said Michael Corleone, so I want to rectify that. The impression of Michael Corleone is he's a very scary guy. That's the impression of him. And later, because that's how Pacino talks, and then it's only later he starts going, "What do you got?" You know what I mean? Like much later in his career, he's like, "The inches we need." And then I love that. Pacino will always do a speech. That one's from Any Given Sunday, where he's like, "And I know if I'm going to have any kind of life," it's like he's in the middle of talking to an American football team, but he has to go. And I know if I'm going to have any kind of life, that I'm going to have to start. And it's like in a Scent of a Woman is one of his best ever speeches, and he goes like, "I always knew the right path to take, but I never took it. It was too hard, too bleeping hard, So he'll always in the middle. He's talking about the ostensible subject, and of course he has to have a bit about his midlife crisis in the middle. But he develops that different tone later, except for in Carlito, where he has that rough tone, but has to be Hispanic in Carlito's way. So he's like, "I'm tired, baby. I'm tired. I've slightly changed my accent. Can you see? I'm tired." So slightly different Pacino in that one. Anyway,
you get it all on this stream, don't you?
Well, I see. I said before, Sam, you get education and entertainment in equal measure, and I realized after writing that you're the education. I have to be the entertainment.
I could do my Brando at some point. I think.
What's the matter with you? Your brain gone soft? Never tell anybody outside the family what you're thinking.
See, that was great. It's already better than all of mine.
That was
I encourage Sam
out
of it. No, that was good. I can't even do it that well. You come to me. You don't even think to call me God.
You come to my day of my daughter's wedding.
He asked me to do murder for money. That is not justice. Your daughter's still alive. Anyway, we won't do that. But we could. We won't say it, but we could, like Trump. Anyway, we need to get back to it. But we did promise entertainment and education, and yeah, there it was. Oh, and thank you for the super chat. I think maybe I'll read them at the end, like a big shot.
Thank you. I guess what we saw in Yes Minister has become far worse. But I will give this one
exactly.
out
Yes
to
Minister
Jacob.
is a training manual, not comedy.
Yeah,
Jacob, as an Hellenist, how do you see this?
Yeah, well, I guess I'd add one thing to the picture that Dominic painted, especially when you were talking about the kind of psychological identification that most of the Conservative Party have actually with Labour or Blairite policies, which is also a kind of ideological and social identification they have with each other, with the entire political class. This is something you kind of talked about in your introduction, that the reason why, if you have a Conservative government or a Labour government, it doesn't necessarily seem to make much difference, is because they're part of the same system. They not just kind of send their kids to the same schools or hang out together kind of privately, but also fundamentally their interests and their whole career trajectory came through a system that, as you say, was designed for a very different era, but today functions predominantly to protect the interests of those who are in the system. And so
Exactly.
the fact that you can't really put a paper between a Labour or a Conservative government, that there's very little difference in their policies, is precisely because they exist as almost free-floating class of individuals who have no real connection to the wider public, have no identification with the things that ordinary people want, but are prepared to occasionally say, kind of give a little bit of rhetorical ground in talking about migration or talking about the economy, but actually have no interest in really seeing these things through. And that's why the point that you made about the need for not just a kind of change in government, but a change of an entire system. That's why that, I think, at this moment resonates so strongly, not just with some of the elites you talk about, but also the wider public. People see that this is a uniparty, a regime, a complete system, and that whole thing has to be turfed out.
Mick?
Yeah, I think, sorry, is this working now? Yeah. The most remarkable achievement, I think it's very difficult for people who think of themselves as conservatives, and I meet a lot of people in Brussels and Europe who still think the Conservative Party is part of their system. It's very difficult to come to terms with what the Tory Party have done and have become. I think their most amazing, most remarkable achievement of the Tory government over 14 years is basically to dig their own grave, to sign their own death warrant. And that is something from the party that for 200 years has been the most successful political machine, certainly in Britain and arguably in Europe and beyond. That they have made conservatism in Britain a dirty word. When I was working with Nigel Farage's Reform Party in the last election campaign, at the end of the campaign, I went to knock on some doors in Clacton where Nigel was standing to try and kind of get a sense of the public. And you almost felt when you knocked on the door, in a very, very strong Conservative seat, always had been, you knocked on the door, the first thing you had to say was, I'm not a Tory, I'm not a Conservative, because people would be, would almost chase you out of their street, but such was the anger and the fury about it, that they have betrayed everything that people expected them to stand for. There is nothing Conservative about any of their policies, from net zero, the opening of the borders of mass migration, and Brexit, as Dominic rightly points out, is the key thing to understand that that's the great achievement of British politics in the last 14 years. Is Brexit is the popular revolt against the establishment that won the Brexit vote, and the Conservative Party were against that. David Cameron, who described himself, we must remember, as the heir to Blair, called that referendum absolutely confident that they would win. In fact, we should thank David Cameron from the bottom of our hearts. The one great achievement of his was to call be stupid enough to call that referendum in 2016 and imagine that he was going to win it. They were against it. And then under May, they spent 3 years trying to destroy it. And then when Boris won the terrific victory with some help from Nigel in 2019 on the slogan, "Get Brexit done," they didn't. In fact, he opened the borders even more and destroyed Britain's national sovereignty. So the one thing that people counted on for the Conservatives to do, they've been completely against. So I think we should really recognise that they are, the last 200 years has come to an end as far as the Tory party is concerned, and we have to recognise there's a need for something else.
Could I just add a couple of things on that? So just on your first.
So, did you say pause there or not? I was going to pause it.
No,
anyway,
I heard a voice say something, and I thought it was you. I thought it was you, but I think it was someone on stage.
I thought it was you, but it was someone on stage. Okay, good. That was weird. Yeah, I just thought the pause clip was a good ending. Sort of, Hume reached a peroration. No, he reached what would be the phrase? Anyway, enough of that. It's interesting that he talked about Boris's success and getting in, and how the Tories are now completely finished. And even today in the Telegraph, Tim Stanley was interviewing David Bull of Now of Reform, and it just struck me that Tim Stanley, for a start, was saying that immigration and concern about Islam were rabbit holes that Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib were going down. So it's completely insane. I mean, immigration, the number one concern for people at the moment, and for a long time, it's always been top three. So that's completely insane. But also, and I said to you the other day, Tim Stanley was interviewing a nice, cozy interview with Ash Sarkar. So in we know full well they'd never have a fascist on, but of course they'll have a literal communist. So in Tim Stanley's world, the Overton window is wet Tory to communist. That's the range.
I
Very
didn't
bizarre.
realize how solicitous that interview was. I mean,
Oh,
his
yeah.
his tongue was all over her body. I mean, it was gross.
Maybe we should have streamed that. We should be streaming these every day. We should stream
Yeah.
that, and then we should be streaming that. Yeah, no, that was disgusting, wasn't it? When you think about what the Telegraph is ostensibly there for, which is
Yeah.
conservatism. But it made me think, based on what Mick Hume was saying there, this idea of centrism has destroyed the Tories. So today in this interview, as we record, Dr. David Bull said that politics is always won in the centre ground. Complete nonsense. So Cummings himself has always pointed out there is no real centre. People like the NHS, but they also like the death penalty. It's like they have a range of views that are not in any way in line with the Westminster idea of the centre. Another way of looking at it, people said, well, Rupert Lowe replied to me, or whoever does his tweets replied to me today and said mass deportations are the centre. That's another way of looking at it. But basically, I say there's no real centre. And look at who actually was successful. Margaret Thatcher, one of the most successful leaders of all time in terms of how long she was in and in terms of reputation. Very radical, certainly on the economy, very, very radical, massive change, shut down entire industries, hated by certain sections of the population and so on. Tony Blair, very radical, destroyed our whole constitution, or at very least, as Starkey says, overlaid a completely different model on top of hundreds and hundreds of years of history, going back to Magna Carta. Extremely radical. The Leave campaign, extremely radical, and taking us out of Europe, big change, against the grain of the establishment. That was radical. So this idea that the centre wins, just nonsense. Look at who are the centrists: Theresa May, John Major, David Cameron. They scraped by. Then Boris, as sort of Hume's talking about there, he got in on that big majority. That's when he promised to be more radical, and when he was listening to Cummings. And then when he abandoned that, he was destroyed. And look at Sunak. Look at the centrists. Look at like Starmer. They don't do well if he is a centrist. They don't do well, these moderates, this centre ground, this kind of... And Starmer's done it by kind of capitulating to anyone that will listen. You don't do well like that. You do well, actually, by saying, this is my agenda. I don't care about what you say, and then making it reality. This centre thing, absolute nonsense. That's my view anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'd like to, if I may indulge and do a little bit of a set piece here to respond to that, because it is important to separate that sense of the Conservative Party triangulating its political offering at any one time and the institution of the Conservative Party that he was referring to there that's persisted over this 200-year period. And if I may, there's a little excerpt from the introduction to a book called The Conservatives, A History by a man called Robin Harris, who was a speechwriter for Mrs. Thatcher. And I'd like to just read this out. It's a short paragraph at the beginning, but it's very telling. Here it goes. The Conservative Party is, in one particular and little noted respect, not like other modern parties at all. As a result, this book will not read like, say, a complementary companion to the various histories of the Labour Party. A recent, if forgettable, example may illustrate this point. In June 2009, James Purnell, the Work and Pensions Secretary, sent a highly damaging letter of resignation to the Prime Minister of the day, Gordon Brown. In order to assert his nobility of intention, not least in the eyes of Labour Party supporters, Mr. Purnell, with what degree of sincerity it is difficult to gauge, echoed a sentiment often heard on the left. Dear Gordon, we both love the Labour Party. I have worked for it for 20 years and you far longer. We know we owe it everything and it owes us nothing. No Conservative politician at any stage of the party's history would have written such a letter. No one has ever pretended to love the Conservative Party. It is doubtful if even the most sentimental member of the Primrose League, let alone a backbench MP, would have claimed to owe the party everything. Any serious Tory figure adopting such a pose would incur immediate ridicule. The Conservative Party exists, has always existed, and can only exist to acquire and exercise power, albeit on a particular set of terms. It does not exist to be loved, hated, or even respected. It is no better or worse than the people who combine to make it up. It is an institution with a purpose, not an organism with a soul.
Wow, very nice.
So you have to remember, it's a vessel for power.
Very
so
interesting.
Policies.
Yeah. So it's a vessel for power, and that's why it's been the most successful political party in Europe. But it's completely abandoned that, has it not? With the recent ditching Mr. 80 majority Boris, who was, like it or not, was a charismatic leader who was loved by many, even though he then did the Boris wave. It was a disaster. Why did they get rid of Boris? They were imploding. They forgot about being at the party of power. Then they put in. Then they wanted Sunak, but Truss beat him, and they didn't like that. So then they got rid of Truss. Then they put in Sunak, who was awful, who was always going to be awful. And then they put in Kemi, who was always going to be awful and just isn't a leader, even if she may have some abilities. And I don't particularly enjoy beating up on her, but she just isn't any good. She isn't a leader. And they'll say later why only Farage is actually only charismatic leader around now. So how do you square that, Simon, that passage there with their recent behaviour?
I don't know. I don't know. They've lost the will. I mean, it was you've been talking about how they've essentially been hollowed out completely at CCHQ. The local branches have fallen away. There is perhaps, they are on life support resuscitation at the moment. There's no sense of a will to power. There's barely a will to survive. This is the long dark night of their soul, but they don't have a soul, as the paragraph just said. So it's just a long dark night.
Yeah. Cummings described it once in another interview. They just completely decided to just shoot themselves in the face or something like that. So,
I think it's a sort of cancer that arose with Theresa May and her the repudiation of the party. This thing of not wanting to be the nasty party, but that, of course, in effect, neuters the possibility of any kind of change because people will then become so self-conscious as political agents in terms of their wish to, fulfill themselves in the hierarchy of the party and of the government, to be able to enact anything that's going to displease anybody. And that kind of, dare I say it, feminizing impulse for everybody to be behaving agreeably and not to hint at any kind of the difficult problems that have to be negotiated is one of the things that's led to their ruination. They haven't been able to speak. I mean, you consider back in the, you can't see something like the Monday Club existing now, where there might be sort of radical backbenchers in the party who had, very defined and vocal positions. They may not have been able to necessarily influence the party, but they existed in a kind of ecology which, the party was able to function with and perhaps even incorporate some of those elements, and perhaps people like, Mrs. Thatcher were able to represent the sensible centre of those things. Even to the left, though, of course, that still looks rabidly, dangerously right wing. But now, of course, you imagine after May, they couldn't conceive of having people differing on the most basic level of what conservative quote ideology might look like.
Yes, and it's all just about being PC and being woke, and actually even David Bull was on Cameron's A list. So the A list has so much is responsible for so much of the problems with the current Tory party because it was all about diversity and it was all about let's get Liz Truss, and even Liz Truss was an A list. Even that whole generation, I think, was Priti Patel. I'm not sure, but it was all about diversity. And Cameron openly said he didn't want. We had too many white men. It was just anti-white garbage, which now seems, makes him one of the great criminals of history. But anyone who says things like that now, to me, just looks like a kind of deranged kind of, I don't want to compare them to any historical figure that we're not allowed to mention on YouTube, but they look like some of history's greatest monsters, the anti-white people, because it's flipped. And I was always sensible about it and saying, why do you hate white people? But things like the A-list really have damaged the Tories completely. So it's not about talent, it's about nonsense. But let's crack on, because I'll get into that more later, because he talks about reform, not wanting to take on too many Tories. So we'll get into that later.
Point. As an example of what you were saying about how it's kind of like one social network, 3 weeks after we won the 2019 election, it was early January 2020, and I was sitting in the Prime Minister's office with Boris, and he said to me, what are you going to be doing? What are you doing this month? And I said, well, I'm having meetings with all of these people, the heads of the British Army, the intelligence services, the Cabinet Office, people in planning, people in procurement, etc. Like, now we've got to deliver what we said we were going to do. We promised everyone this huge change. Now we have to deliver it. And Boris's reply was, no. What I want you to do now is make friends with the media. What we've got to do now is make friends with everybody again. And I think this goes to the heart of the problem, right? Fundamentally, we in Vote Leave did vote leave, we did Brexit because we wanted to change the country profoundly in a different direction. But Boris, as soon as we won the election, his fundamental priority was repairing his social networks with the old London world. And secondly, on Mick's point, what he says about the Conservative Party is correct, but here's an example of how profound the weirdness is in what they did. They destroyed themselves. But now the conventional wisdom, if you look at the most high status pundits writing in places like the London Times, etc., the conventional wisdom about what happened 2024 is they lost because, quote, they lurched so far to the right, unquote, right? Now it's a kind of insanity. So with Boris and Sunak, they literally used taxpayers' money to put on a wedding for the most famous child serial killer in the country. And they did this because they said they had no alternative thanks to the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, right? This is what they literally did. But their self-explanation inside the system for why they went wrong was, we lurched to the right. And I think it's impossible to understand the meltdown of the old Conservative Party without also understanding this weird parallel world which the old media system has developed. And you can see it on COVID, you can see it on Ukraine, you can see it on every important issue, where they herd to these extraordinary positions in a complete delusional parallel reality. But then the MPs treat this delusional reality as if it is actually reality. And that's why you see this constant process of weird, what I call narrative whiplash. Like in January, Keir Starmer saying, no, the real story is not the grooming gangs. The real story is Elon Musk and Twitter and far-right conspiracy theories. Oh, 5 months later, there's an official inquiry into the grooming gangs. And this process just keeps happening in a kind of accelerating tailspin.
Yeah, so I probably went a bit early with my censorist comment, but that's exactly it. Their explanation was, "Oh, we lurched to the right," whereas in fact they were not a right wing at all, and actually they needed to go far further. And this is always a problem we come back to: the system, whatever you want to call it, Whitehall, the blob. Well, the blob's different, but the ministers themselves, the whole thing, really, though. Yeah, definitely the blob as well. They won't go anywhere near radical enough. And they think they've gone too radical. Now they need to pull it back and get it back in with the journalists. Of course, that's only Cummings' view of it, but that does sound incredibly plausible to me.
Yeah. It's one of the classic problems with these closed elite systems. You just develop a kind of a noise that builds up within the very small cabal or presidium at the top. At the grassroots level, the activists and the local associations are meaningless, and even the new intakes of MPs are just a kind of window dressing novelty. But because it's the same sort of tranche of people governing in various configurations over successive cabinets in a very short space of time, you develop a kind of space in which feedback is amplified, and this Theresa Mayification of the party, which seeks to keep things within a very narrow band of acceptable policy, just simply gets worse and worse, and the noise then becomes deafening to anyone within the system. So that they it's almost like they then, as a result, hallucinate themselves into this artificial space that Cummings is talking about, this kind of weird reality. Where nobody knows kind of where to turn. So in a sense, they might as well just pay attention to their non-executive directorships and their appearances on Today program. There's no way in which they can make sense of what's going on, because it's going to be fraught with all sorts of contradictions. And at the same time, they're contesting against the permanent civil service, which has its own ideas and to which they are not privy anyway, as he also talks about.
Very interesting. And we learned a new word there, presidium, or some of us did, which is the standing executive committee in a communist country. In the former Soviet Union, the committee which functioned as the legislative authority when the Supreme Soviet was not sitting. And it comes from the Latin for protection or garrison.
Yeah.
So I think, I said you'd learn. I said you'd laugh and learn tonight. I just like that. You see, Simon will come out with these Soviet references because he works on another channel, which is a Stalin channel. He works quite extensively on
Untrue.
Well, it's increasingly true.
A channel which is studying, which is studying the dynamics of Stalin's government at the moment, as a, if you like, a resonant comparison with what happens in technocratic systems that are essentially closed to the intelligence of the wider party and, you know, the ideological variance within parties.
I see. It's not a hagiography at all. It's just a just a value-free study. All right,
Yeah.
let's plow on, as I always say. Even that makes it sound bad, but it's not bad. It's great.
Staying on this topic, partly at least, because I think we really kind of went into in depth what's wrong with the Conservative Party, but we might have a slimmer of hope. So if you look at the polls, then the Reform Party is doing extremely well. I mean, in the past 3 or 4 months, they had a stable lead, which has seemed to be increasing. So my question here is, do they have a chance? I mean, historically, I mean, you can argue that the UK was like a 2.5 party state. I mean, kind of the devolution changed it a bit, but usually, you know, kind of outside parties don't fare well. And Reform Party, although it did well in the past local elections, still, if you look at kind of general elections, they usually didn't do as well. I mean, Farage and his previous parties. But now they seem to be doing well. And also on the media question, I think they really effectively used, like what Trump was doing, kind of alternative media outlets and not use the mainstream media. So my question really is, do they have a chance, and kind of what's the future of conservatism in the UK in a sense? If you don't have the Conservatives, can Reform be the Conservative Party? I think Jacob wants to start now here.
Yeah, well, just to give a sense of, which I think is important, of the scale of the opportunity, and maybe my colleagues on the panel might be a better place to talk about whether Reform are the right alternative, but the scale of the opportunity.
Before he gets going, doesn't he sound a bit like Constantine?
Thin and reedy.
That's all I had. Just I don't know, just ask in the chat if he sounds like Constantine. That is all.
Opportunity is enormous for lots of reasons, but 2 stand out. One is that, in contrast to lots of European countries, we have first past the post in the United Kingdom, which means that the system is very, very hard to penetrate for outsiders. But suddenly, when it changes, you have an opportunity to completely change the system, and that's something that whilst for a long time I know people that wanted a significant change talked about reforming the voting system. Actually, we're in a position now in the UK where there's an enormous opportunity to have a whole clean sweep of the system, and that's really important. And secondly, the degree to which in the UK at the moment we're seeing the complete erosion of the sustaining narrative that allowed the system to kind of have at least some air of plausibility among ordinary people. And it's almost become a topic in itself in the UK, how you now hear things from ordinary people, your grandma, your auntie, your friends, that you just wouldn't have heard even a year ago, even 6 months ago.
Pause.
So the possibility.
Is that Harrison Pitt sitting in the second row on the left of the picture there?
Oh,
No.
yeah.
It looks like him, but he wouldn't wear a t-shirt, would he?
Oh, he would, yeah, and he would, and I've seen him in that t-shirt, in fact, in pictures. That is Harrison, yeah.
There you go. And I think I saw Alex Webster as well in one of the previous shots of the audience, but there you go. I could be
the plot.
I could be misidentifying.
Yeah,
sorry, this is inside baseball.
It's not that full, is it? You think Cummings would have packed them out? It's one of these tough afternoon gigs. Hello, Glastonbury. It's 1 p.m.
People are saying it is like a weird music festival.
Yeah,
like
yeah. That's the one. That's when you know you're old, Simon. You, instead of watching, what's that guy called? The black guy who hates us and hates his the IDF. What's he called? That guy?
Oh,
Bob Villain.
Oh yes.
Instead of going to watch that or Kneecap, here you are with Cummings listening to Cummings' greatest hits, which is Completely Crackers Potemkin. You're like, do Completely Crackers Potemkin.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, I always do that one. Sorry, that's the analogy. Yeah, but good pause. And I also want to say at that point then, since we've already paused, he was talking about first past the post, and it is interesting. It's not something I think about a lot. The conventional wisdom is, we want PR so we can bring in new parties and so on. But actually, he says with first past the post, very hard to change it. When you do get a change, it can suddenly be a landslide, and that is what we're seeing with Reform. I mean, get on later to why Reform are awful, but still, that is interesting.
PR is interesting. I lived in Australia for 13 years in my, from childhood to early 20s, and it's a PR system out there. and my impression of the politics was always that it was quite static. It always felt that, I mean, first of all, politics took place in an artificially confected state, the Australian Capital Territory where Canberra is, which is away from the main cities like Sydney, the big cities. And you always got the sense that it was kind of quite corrupt. Australian politics, really, it was distant from you, and edicts just flew out of Canberra, and the state premiers as well, and it just felt like Britain is much more activated politically than people. I mean, latterly, of course, people are changing in Australia, but the governing by fiat out there seems much more noticeable because your politicians seem so much more distant, and PR makes it seem less the distribution of the elected chambers seems less relevant. The personalities don't get so much of a look in as they do here, and it feels very neutralized as a political space. It's difficult to explain until you've lived under it, but they love just banning things out there with barely any opposition.
Well, they're more authoritarian naturally, aren't they? I mean, they come from, as Clive James says, prison wardens, and I've noticed they're just much more authoritarian. And
it's that thing I said last time about in the 80s, going into the 90s, there was this fascination with the success of the Japanese economy, and therefore the Japanese corporate model of consensus, and then that phrase consensus politics broke out, especially in Australia. So it was seen to be virtuous to adopt a consensus-based position in politics across the aisle. And of course, that mitigates against really properly discussing or parsing any kind of issue from an ideological point of view. Everything just becomes a managerial problem.
Yeah, interesting. And Douglas says Sensible Fest. That could be what it's called. Yeah, Potemkin Fest. Suggest your names for this festival in the chat. It's I mean, they've done badly there, but it does look a hot day, to be fair. Where is it? Brussels or something?
No, somebody said it's in Hungary.
Oh, it's Hungary. Yeah, no, it is Hungary. Yeah, because the guy says we're in Hungary. Yeah,
in Esztergom in Hungary, and that kind of makes sense if Harrison was out there, because I know New Culture Forum have links to Hungary and
he's always doing that European stuff now, isn't he? The Forge, there's something European. He's always out interviewing Camus. Yeah, man. He's a throwback to the time of the gentleman Englishman traveling. So I'll never be that, because I'm from I'm a pro who can never leave. I'm just here eating oven chips on my computer, watching telly. Basically, it's a new version of just watching the telly.
We're from the gutter. We're proudly from the gutter, but we're looking at the stars.
Someone invited me to a Somalian restaurant today. I'm like, what are you talking? One, I don't socialize. Two, if I did, I wouldn't eat that on principle. I'd only eat at English businesses. Do you know what they are? They're bourgeois bohemians.
Bobos, yes. Yeah. Matt Goodwin keeps referring to this, doesn't he? It's someone identified that phenomenon.
Oh, I always see it's Peter Hitchens' classic moment on Question Time. The bourgeois bohemians, they have no idea how you people he goes. It's one of his great moments. Anyway, let's crack on.
An enormous clean sweep change is really, 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 really big in the UK, and that's why whether some people like it or not, and maybe a panelist can get into this, but the alternative at the moment is reform, and the question is, what does reform really need in order to better grasp that huge void that there is in British politics, and to really kind of win the trust of the people that are desperate for some kind of an alternative, and that's where I think a lot of work is hopefully being done. Maybe Mick is better placed in this, but hopefully lots of work's been done in that direction. But I just really wanted to give a sense of the enormous opportunity that there is in British politics, and makes it one of the most exciting periods that we could possibly go through.
Mick?
Yeah, I agree with that, what Jacob was saying there. If you put it in the European context, there's a sense that in which Britain was always seen as different, not only because they voted for Brexit, but because the two-party system seemed to survive in Britain, where in other countries the old parties had disappeared. And what we've seen now is that those two old parties were really empty shells, and that we're going the same way as the European system, where the Italian Christian Democrats can run the country 50 years and then just disappear. And we got the same kind of breakdown of an old order in Britain. I think the opportunity for reform is huge. And not only because of what they're doing, but because, as Nigel Farage himself is very fond of saying, there's something happening out there in the way that Jacob was just talking about. There's a kind of popular revolt taking place against the political establishment, a very quiet one, or it's getting less and less quiet with the protests against migrants being put up in luxury hotels, etc. And I think it's a very profound opportunity, and I think reform is the only race in town, horse in the race as far as that is concerned. And I think this is not a protest vote. You know, this is what all the establishment parties keep saying, oh, this is a protest vote, it's midterm and everything. This is something much more profound than that. This is some people expressing the absolute negative rejection of the status quo and a positive will for something different. And I think the principles that reform are enunciating, obviously the kind of problems we're talking about here in terms of how do you break down the deep state and everything are very profound. But the principles that reform are elaborating, beginning with getting Britain out of the European Convention of Human Rights and re-establish national sovereignty, have a real popular appeal that gives them an absolutely huge opportunity. What they did in those local elections in May, the Conservatives have run Kent County is on the south coast of England, is where the small boats come to from France. The Conservatives have run Kent since the Norman Conquest or thereabouts. They removed them entirely, more or less, from Kent County Council and took control of it. And you've reached the tipping point, whereas I think Jacob's alluding to, people will now tell you they're going to vote for reform in a way that it would have been a secret reform voter in the past. It's now become a publicly acceptable thing to do, not in dinner party circles in London, but around much of the country. So I think the opportunity for them is tremendous, and that if we really want to change things, you've got to get behind them. Now, there is another discussion to be had about what are you going to do? How are you going to change the system? How are you going to deal with this, with the kind of dark forces that we're up against once you're in office? But that's not a reason not to try. That's not a reason not to get behind a kind of popular revolt against the establishment, which, in the spirit of Brexit, is something that many of us have been waiting for our whole lives.
Dominic?
Big problem, of course, is that reformists aren't against the establishment. They are just a new establishment, much to my disappointment. I don't relish it, but there it is. They do something crazy every day. And this time it was David Bull talking was today's craziness. I keep wanting to put out just tweets that I know will get me hated in my drafts. One of them is, reform is the furthest left party we have ever seen on these shores. I just love the phrase, these shores. I just think it's like a funny, like silly internet voice tweet. People won't get the nuance of it, the weird sort of phrasing. And then I have another one. It is no exaggeration to say Reform UK are to the left of Karl Marx on every single issue. That's another one I've got lined up. If people annoy me, I will release those tweets.
Yeah. Did you see in the Ash Sarkar interview that she was talking about?
I watched the whole thing, bro.
Of course. Well, I'm sort of saying it in that showbiz way. I know the answer already. It's a leading line, you know. I'm sorry. You see, folks, it's all fake on this channel. We're just pretending to do these questions. But it was, you know, what was she saying about taking Nigel Farage more seriously now because of the sense of being flanked from the left by him?
Yeah. She underestimated Farage, she admitted. Yeah. That was interesting. Yeah, they're taking him more seriously, but she's sort of interesting in that they've all left Labour, haven't they? The left has left Labour. She's basically gone to the Greens, as far as I could tell. And now they're taking Farage seriously. But what did you make of that? I mean, does that mean anything?
Well, I never believe anything she says anyway, you know, and she is a just lying communist. But I think in a sense they're acknowledging the cut through, and you know, this is on the back of her launching her recent book, which is saying to the radical left, we really have to ditch the woke stuff because it is alienating people now. And so they are trying to return to a class-based analysis with her and Aaron Bastani, you know, going forward from here.
Yes, they've definitely done that. And one thing extra repulsive about that Telegraph interview is when she said something comrade. I can't remember the phrase she used, but it was a sort of communist technique or approach. And she went, no, comrade. Like, and someone said comrade in our chat tonight, but it's funny when we say it here because it's like a reference to AA saying like what we need a word for ourselves and so on. But when she said it, it was like, they've got to like sit there with this communist and sort of kind of like and kind of legitimize her. It's so weird.
Well, Tim
a bit weird about that.
Tim Stanley was lavishing her with praise because he does the Moral Maze with her on Radio 4.
I know.
So he was bigging her up and essentially trying to propose that she would come round to more conservative positions because of attitudes that she's taking towards the value of preserving the family, and community, and the kind of originating traditional principles of a conservative worldview. So he's kind of grooming her into a sort of soft conservatism. Just to answer Steve P in the chat, what's this Ash Sarkarfid malarkey? It's the Daily Telegraph's channel. They do a program called The Daily Tea, and there was an interview with her a day or two ago, and with Tim Stanley and some other guy who I don't like.
We're going to have to review it now because we've talked about it. But yeah, they and Camilla, who is sort of a former colleague, was still technically colleague of mine. I kind of like Camilla. She's got a good personality, but she did call Tommy a white supremacist. So
Yes.
you go, okay, so on that show, that show is about attacking sort of liberal moderates and calling them things that they're not, and then welcoming communists and just giving them, a fawning interview, as you say, and say yes. And Stanley even said, he said, but I think he'll come across to reform, didn't he? Is what he said at the end. I mean, but it makes sense because reform are far left, as I've said. I've got one more draft banger I haven't released on Twitter because I know everyone will misconstrue this. It's because it's a funny joke. I wrote, Simon, if hating literally all foreigners makes me xenophobic, then so be it.
Yeah,
I think that's an absolute banger, but I just don't dare release it because you know what Twitter's like.
Or maybe you'll be surpassed by events and it won't look like real radicalism anymore. Do you know I said to you about listening to Talk TV, that interview? Ian Collins was on last night and he had a chap called Peter Barnes on. And Peter Barnes was kind of just doing sort of boilerplate, middle of the road, not even conservative or right-wing values. He was just a liberal. He's just a liberal. And at one point he said... Yes, he could be. Hello, Peter. He's not the same Peter I like. The Peter Barnes I like is a playwright, but it's not him. It's a different Peter Barnes. But he talks about, I'm a free speech fundamentalist. I know that may be controversial with some people, as if it's controversial at all. People try to claim this sort of performative radicalism because that, again, it tends to be seen as being aligned with some sort of deep authenticity. And,
I read Spiked and I don't care who knows it.
Yeah. Call me what you like.
I like free speech and women's spaces, and I'm just hey, I'm a liberal. Deal with it.
I don't care
what
who
Voltaire
knows
said.
Yeah.
Me and Voltaire. I will defend to the death your right to kill me in the street or something. I'm paraphrasing.
That's right.
Yeah, I think so. There's no doubt that reform could win. Polls are clear. Both parties are in unprecedentedly low positions. Both of them are led by people self-evidently incapable of doing the job.
Lol.
The public has looked at both of them and knows that both of them are completely hopeless.
Completely. That was a double completely hopeless. And it was talking about Kemi and the Tories being hopeless. So it was it was a good run of Cummings bingo. Completely hopeless. Just FYI. So it's the most nerdy kind of obscure game, isn't it, of all time?
I love it.
Thank you. This is a good
I love idiosyncrasies of the way people speak and drawing attention to them. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm obsessed with it. Someone's talking about my Substack. Okay, I'll look at that later. But let's crack on.
Two institutions which themselves are completely rotting.
Oh, it's a third one.
The institutional kind of decay and collapse of the Conservative
Party.
Tsunami
of completely.
An entity that was an incredibly thriving social entity 50 years ago is now dead. You have a Conservative Party meeting in places that the thousands of people would have gone decades ago. Now 8 people turn up and they're all kind of over 70 or something. So at a profound level, at the grassroots level, the Conservative Party is done. It's finished. I think the really big questions are, first of all...
Sorry, I was muted. Probably is worth quickly stopping there because, grassroots are absolutely dead. That does chime with what I heard about the Conservative HQ and all that, and the fact he's saying it's just 8 people over 70. Of course, there may be some Cummings exaggeration, but yes, there was a very interesting piece, and I covered this on a Lotus Eaters segment last week, which was a piece from Henry Hill in The Critic, I believe, and it was about how the Conservatives, I may have said this before, aren't creating new Conservatives because they haven't really done the work to imbue the culture, to be in the culture. We know that the culture is run by the left, and they just haven't done anything like the work. So you just don't have new Tories coming through. And he also pointed out that there's no obvious sort of segment of society that reforms serve exactly either, which weakens them both and makes them actually both quite vulnerable, because they don't really serve an obvious section of society. I thought it was interesting. And the Tories used it. He says reform don't, they're new and it's not clear who they represent. And the Tories used to, of course, represent a segment of society. We can kind of picture a sort of rural Tory who's not so keen on his things being built in his area and probably wants a free market and small state and all these kind of things. But actually that person does sort of barely exist, isn't coming through anymore. So that's interesting. And just on a quick note, when I talk about how the Tories haven't funded culture and sort of been involved in culture, or generally people on the right haven't done that, it's something we talk about quite a lot. There was a guy today, Paul Graham, and it just struck me that here, a study of 1,452 undergrads at Northwestern and Michigan between 2023 and 2025 found that 88% pretended to hold more left-wing views than they actually had in order to succeed socially or academically. So just think about that. The absolute domination from the left of sort of culture, education, to the point where 88% will lie. Say, yeah, I'm a leftist. I mean, that is just total domination. Let's be honest. And old Yarvin had an interesting quote on it. Old Yarvin. This is what kind of stream do you end up just saying? Old Curtis Yarvin had a great comment on it, which I'll find, Simon, while you offer some sort of comment.
Well, it's interesting what you say there about people falsifying their preferences in social discourse. It reminds me of a bit of I, Claudius, I think. And, I, Claudius is about the early Roman imperial period with people like Augustus and Tiberius. And there's a scene in the first episode, I think, where there's a party that's being held for Emperor Augustus, who's well bedded in now. And there's a poet who is about to speak a heroic poem. And the herald of the court comes in and announces for silence for this poet. And the poet turns to him and says, "My God, what a magnificent voice you have." And this herald says, "I used to be an actor, sir." And the poet goes, "Oh, really? Yes, yes," he says. "Everyone's an actor in Rome now."
Wow, you won't get this stuff on other streams. I love that.
No.
All these rich library of things Simon can just draw, and it's quite impressive, isn't it? I think, and in that time, I found my Curtis Yarvin tweet, which was, imagine worrying about Trump in this situation. How much more power Trumpism would need to have to matter this much? How far MAGA is from actually beating this? There aren't enough orders of magnitude in your computer. So yeah, he's pointing out the massive gulf, and that's true. I thought this wasn't Curtis Yarvin at first, but it does seem to actually be him, doesn't it? So on Twitter. So yeah, just a reminder how we've lost the whole, or in America and Britain and Europe, I suppose, the left have just been dominating for so long. But hey, we're fighting back. And in some ways, we're doing quite well.
Things are starting to happen. I will just say on various grapevines, there are optimistic noises of organization beginning to happen. And dare I say it, even funding towards all sorts of new projects and events, possibly outside of the current sort of alternative ecosystem that's provided by things like content creators on channels. There will be sort of more independent stuff coming, I think. I have a strong sense that things will happen.
Good.
Yeah.
But on this stream, the only funding comes from the super chats, so we thank you for them, and we'll read them later. It's just to point out that Nick can't be accused of being a grifter. I'm doing this out of really just a bizarre sort of love for it, really. Certainly these streams, obviously the Starkey interview made some bank, but it also cost me a lot of money. Anyway, people don't need to know that. Crack on.
As Nigel himself has said, reform was in the 2024 election and still is essentially Nigel plus an iPhone. Now, Nigel and an iPhone can get more votes than anybody else in the next election, and he can destroy the Conservative Party in the next election for sure. But nobody in an iPhone can take over a whole government system in a G7 country and actually get to grips with all the problems that we've talked about. So the fundamental question, I think, for reform is, can they set out a story and then execute it of how, in contrast to these two broken, declining, rotten old parties, can they tell a story of how reform goes around the country and recruits wonderful people from all walks of life, people who are soldiers, people who run NHS hospitals, people in education, who are scientific researchers, etc. Do you see a process whereby reform tries to build that and recruit that? If it does that, then the situation will be profoundly different. And the second big thing is this question of actually controlling the system. Liz Truss came in 2022 with all kinds of claims about what she was going to do, and she was spat out in 40 days. For reform, or for anybody, if reform can't do it for someone else, to actually control the system, you need a detailed plan from the first hour of when you walk into the number 10 building of, these are the critical jobs you have to occupy, these people must be removed, these people must be replaced, these are the critical institutional nodes in the network that you must actually control, properly control, in a way that no British government has actually controlled for decades. And that means at the core of it, going back to what I said in my talk, there is a central, profound question which everyone needs to answer before the 2028-29 election. Are you going to carry on with the old Whitehall system of a century? Or is the new government actually going to control the government? And that means telling Whitehall, we now control appointments, not you. And that is the test. And Farage is going to have to develop a set of people that can figure out that plan and then actually execute it from day one. Because otherwise you'll have the same process. You'll have people voting for change, reform takes over, and then you'll just see a train wreck as the old system collapses, the new political thing. Exactly what's happened with Boris, exactly what's happened after Boris, after we, the Vote Leave team, left number 10. Deep state, he goes along with it, completely implosion. Truss ditto, Sunak ditto, Starmer ditto. So Nigel needs to get a plan for how to avoid the same fate.
Brilliant. And you notice there he said completely implosion, which isn't even a sentence, but he loves saying completely so much. Obviously, the word would have been complete implosion, but no. Completely implosion potential.
Classic Dom.
Classic Dom. We love Dom. Do you know what? And he's done one with Steve Edgington, and I'm tempted to ask Steve for his contacts and to actually try and get Dom on the show. But, I've already asked him for Simon Heffer's contacts. I don't be that guy that, you send me a contact, because, it could be annoying. But I'm tempted to try and get him. Because and imagine we could imagine us streaming my own interview of Dominic Cummings. Imagine the meta layers we could create, Simon.
With him in the stream, that would be great.
And then him on the stream, he would come out on our stream he would stream our stream of the interview. Well, when I said completely there, you notice I say it again there, and I say completely 3 times. I almost nailed his voice there for a split second.
That's
in my
very
mind.
good. Very good.
Completely streaming. We're completely Potemkin streaming. It's all Potemkin. Everyone's completely mad. And it's sorry.
He's hard to pin down, I would say. Yeah, you're doing good there. You will build this.
Can I? And I interrupted for one other reason, which is that I just took a Diet Coke out of my new mini fridge. Now people will think, oh, Nick's living the life. He's making loads of money grifting. It's a very inexpensive fridge, but because I'm in this room chained to my desk. Yeah. And it's quite far away from the fridge, which is all the way across the other side. It's not a massive house, but it is across the other side of the flat. And so I bought this mini fridge, and I'll show you. I think it's this one. And isn't that just a thing of beauty? Isn't that gorgeous? And I bought that, and I thought this is going to take me to the next level in streaming.
Streamer, yeah.
And I just think that's a thing of beauty. And I've got it right next to me, and it's just I've taken the can from it. And it can confirm it's cold. So just wanted to
confirm we are accepting sponsorships on this channel. This stream is sponsored by Subcold, refrigeration for the pro streamer.
Subcold. Hey, are you ever doing a stream and you find you need a drink, but what are you going to do? Get up? You can't get up. You're chained to the desk. Absolutely audience captured. Well, Subcold.
I use Subcold all the time.
Really? So, what can I expect from Subcold? Hey, Simon, my can's warm. What can I do?
Subcold delivers your drink to a drinkable optimum of 2 degrees Celsius at all times, all year round.
Wow, like a normal fridge.
That's it, but smaller and suited for the pro streamer. Sits alongside your desktop computer, comfortably and aesthetically, sub-cold for pro stream drinks.
Now I can drink Coke every day. So just want to say thanks to Nigel because he's got to go. And I'm going to read his super chats as a bonus. He's got to go. He says, Mrs. Smith nearly home. I must leave soon. Thanks, Nick. I will catch up soon tomorrow. Thanks, Nigel. He also said, how can anyone not see how establishment reform are? It's embarrassing. I definitely agree with that. We could discuss that. Hell is other people. John Paul Sartre. I think Nick could have written this. Absolutely. And he also said Nick used to be called the big dog. I think we should bring that back. Yeah, because we'll get into that because someone else said I should have a nickname. Oh, and he also said this is for the Pacino chat. See, Nigel again, the absolute star of the stream with the. He's going to pay for that sub-cold fridge single-handedly.
He's
although
a heroic
YouTube
super chatter.
takes 70%. But anyway, and I've seen AA do this, interrupt with something pointless. You are allowed to do it, but we will, of course, go back to the correct thing soon. Here we are. There's the interview. I've totally lost what we were talking about now, but
doesn't really matter.
No, I can't remember
what. We're talking about. Let's talk a little bit about the substantive point that Cummings has here about parties coming in, being prepared to act with executive power in government. This kind of radical idea of MPs being elected, becoming ministers, going into the furnace of Whitehall and declaring enough. We are the masters now. That's just what's got to happen. And it almost seems like we've been living in the shadow of parties who, again, find it unseemly to be so demanding of the civil servants. I'll emphasize that word, servants. Yeah.
Yeah. Serve the servants, Nirvana. Yeah, I do. Yes. Yeah, that's actually what they are doing. They're serving the servants. I think that was on In Utero. So you're right. I mean, Cummings is right there to say, yeah, Cam Farage come in, got the system day one. If they don't, it's going to be the same thing. And I just have close to zero faith that he can. Because nothing about him seems like he's that kind of guy. He needs people like Douglas Carswell, who's fallen out with in the past. He needs him to come in, with his 9 milestones, which we discussed on my interview with him. People who really understand it. And Starkey took credit for those on my interview with Starkey. Whoever it is, someone who understands it needs to get in there. But do you see anything about reform and the kind of people they're bringing on board that says, yeah, these are the people that are going to come in and gut a really complicated bureaucracy?
Well, this is it. This is it. They are not going to be a scalable organization if they're not starting to build cadres, just as the left does all over the country, as Cummings is saying. They need to be surfacing people through some kind of process into positions where they occupy Nigel's trust and they can have tasks delegated and expertise delegated onto them. And that, if anything, would enhance his power and popularity if he can find, I dare say his vanity stops him, people who are better than him at doing certain kinds of thing. But until he does that, it is going to be a sort of regime run by his fiat, and it will collapse. There'll be internal contradictions that will just naturally arise, in the same way that the Conservative Party is neutralized by its own feedback. The same will then occur with reform, unless they do seek to bring up new people. I was talking with a friend about this today, that a lot of content creation on YouTube in the political sphere is us talking to ourselves, people like us in a sort of age range, 20 to 35 to 50, let's say. But we actually do need to start think about addressing educational content. I mean, there is educational content on some channels, like Academic Agent and so on, that are doing university level courses. But perhaps it would be nice to actually see us teaching things like history, for example, and aiming it towards teenagers. I mean, they'll be finding their own interest and their own channels, but why leave it to the BBC and Horrible Histories to persistently defame the country with their bizarre and inverted view of our nation's fame? Why not start channels that actually start to literally, I mean, it feels weird to people to say, you've got to kind of grasp and educate the young, but you do. And you've got to create those, as I say, those cadres of people who will then come in and occupy positions where there is a broad-based and consistent focus on what needs to be done. And Nigel can draw supply from that and from older and more professional people as well. But until he crosses that mental bridge of trust in his mind, I just don't think it's going to happen. And as Cummings says, it'll it'll devolve into what it has been under the previous governments.
Yeah, well, David Bull claimed it. Well, he says that Farage is realizing it can't just be him anymore. Maybe is a little bit. I don't know. I haven't seen loads of evidence of it. Maybe he is, but unfortunately, then he's picking people like Zia Yusuf, so that's also bad. Yeah, and you're absolutely right about teaching. I mean, in a normal world, AA would still be. I mean, we'd miss his channel, but it'd still be teaching, and so would Eric Kaufman would still be at a normal university, and Stelios would still be teaching it. From notice, I think he used to do academia. So all these kinds of people who are forced out of it, or they're forced into some niche, they would all just be teaching. But it's exactly. I mean, Peterson tries to do it with this academy. I mean, I'm not sure how well that's going. Milo was attacking it the other day. And now Peterson, of course, has fallen victim to mold, aka having a mental daughter. He's tried to do things like that. But yes, we do need far more of that education, culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just going to say, it's a couple of people in the chat mentioning there are some excellent people in our sphere of our age who are doing history. Survive the Jive, Tom Rousell, who's very good on the origins of the British people, and Apostolic Majesty, a very serious heavyweight history channel. If you want academic level history, he's your go-to. I mean, he's only quite a young chap, but he talks with the elegant fluidity of an Oxford Dom. So he's a great channel. But I'm talking about stuff for the kids. I'm talking about, I said to my friend today, wouldn't it be great to bring back Jackanory, but good stories? That sort of just basic stuff of inuring young people to, stuff that's outside the kind of agenda-driven slop that we get on the funded mainstream media.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I was doing a long bit about the old BBC videos, the old Pathé stuff and all that. I actually did a riff on it with Paul on a different podcast. And then weirdly, people started talking about it. AA started talking about it as well, just by chance at the same time. He was looking at the BBC archive. You do see that much better stuff in that more innocent time. Yeah, can we bring back teaching the kids about the empire in a good light and in a fun way? That would be great. And by the way, RRH25 says Cummings is an autist. Hey, RR, we're all autists here. Okay.
Yeah.
Before I give it to you, I want to kind of add a second question into this, because we're kind of beating around the bush, but where does this leave the Conservative Party? I mean, they will have a party conference. Will Kimi survive that? Is there kind of a hope from a leader? Will they try to make a deal with reform? I mean, increasingly, it seems that they are the junior partner in this. So please say your comment and perhaps also answer this.
Yeah, well,
where does this leave the Conservatives?
First of all, on Dominic's point about, sorry, I'm sounding like a reform PR act today, but
you're more than welcome.
Thank you. On Dominic's point about Nigel, as you say, he describes himself as Nigel and an iPhone, or as the Tories rather, dismissively talk about, he's a one-man band. My first point would be, well, at least Reform have got a man. At least they've got a leader. And that sets them apart from anybody else on the political scene in the first place, as a charismatic leader who can appeal to public, who can appeal to different generations, by the way, and has more followers on TikTok, which I believe is some kind of Chinese website, but has more followers on TikTok than every other member of the British Parliament put together, because he has a very successful young team behind him on that. So, and as far as the recruiting people, and this comes back to your point about the future of the Tory party, I agree with Dominic that they need to get good professional people around them. That's beginning to happen. The new Law and Order Commissioner they've got is a top former policeman. That's the kind of direction that they're going to be moving in. But I think that will happen with time. And the closer we get to the election, the more that will happen, because people will want to get on board. But so far, the main job has been trying to keep the bad people out.
Yeah.
You've got a queue of failed Tories now lining up who want to get on the reform bandwagon.
Yeah, dangerous for reform, that.
I mean, it's a very, very dangerous thing. And obviously, some of them are going to get in. Hopefully, not very many of them. I think Nigel is aware of this. But that's a sign of the fact of the kind of rats deserting the sinking ship phenomenon with the Tory party. That these people see that they are, like Lee Anderson, a good guy, ex-miner, Tory MP, left and went to reform in the last election and told all of his friends on the right wing of the Tory party they should do the same thing if they wanted to survive in politics. None of them did. And they all said it was a big regret that he'd gone. He's the only one that's still in Parliament of that group he was talking to. So some of those people are good, but a lot of them, I think, the Reform Office doors are now being battered down by former Tory advisors and think tanks and all these people saying, we can help you. To which they say, no thanks, we're all right. We're all right for Tory advisors. But I think that is both a problem for reform, and I think they're setting about dealing with it, but it's also a sign of how desperate things are for the Tory party. They just don't see a future in it. Right.
Yeah. Oh, and he says rightly.
I think.
Yeah. I mean, he says Farage is aware of it, but who have they taken on? Jake Berry, Sarah Poachin. Although Poachin occasionally will come out with something like weirdly based, and then Zia Yusuf will tell her off. But she's kind of been talking about Islam. But you got Poachin, Berry, Tyson, who wanted to be in the Tories, Poachin and Berry, former Tories, Lee Anderson, former Tory, Farage, spiritual Tory, I always say. And they've got rid of Rupert and James. And James McMurdoch does some very base tweets, let's say. So he hasn't really got across this thing. I mean, Zia Yusuf made it impossible for Suella Braverman to be in and for her husband to be in by constantly attacking her, which was weird because she is someone who seemed to reject the Tories and was rejected by them and was very frustrated with the lack of the ability to do anything, which is the same as someone like Cummings. Whether she's the real deal or not, I don't know, but I think she probably is. She's certainly someone you'd take before you take a Jake Berry. So that is bizarre. So when Mick here is saying Farage is aware of that, is he? Doesn't seem to be.
No, he doesn't seem to be, manfully applying himself to the task of surfacing these new elites, which he does now and again have a press conference where he trots out, well, a local councillor here and a local councillor there have come over to us and, it's a red letter day, brilliant. Everybody clap. But I mean, yes, a strategy to infiltrate or insinuate themselves into local government, that's wonderful. But we're not seeing the kind of the future colossi bestriding the political scene in Britain coming from him. And you'd think with the number of connections he has, he would be able to find some people. But again, the likelihood is it's going to be business orientated people because he wants to default back to the kind of easy consolations of Thatcherism, which, as I believe, is just simply not going to fly because it talks to an era that was completely different from where we are at now. You're not gonna get people just with a few tax breaks turning into wildly successful entrepreneurs any longer. The economy is in dire straits. You do need to think in terms of what are you going to do about broad-based industry which supplies the employment needs of people. I mean, I hate to be talking like this as if the economy is just there to be a make-work scheme, but in a sense, there does have to be a broad social base that can be applied to industries that are not just niche industries. It's all very well saying, yes, we're leading on biotech and we're leading on this kind of tech and we're leading on financial services, but that's a very narrow door for most people to get through, and it's simply not realistic for him to preach that it's all somehow going to come good because the dollars are going to flow into these these niche sexy industries. Well, I'm sorry, but we need people to make stuff again.
Absolutely, yeah, make stuff again. That would be make England make stuff again would be a decent. I'm sure that I could revise that slogan a bit, but yeah. Absolutely right. And Starkey pointed out in my interview, Thatcher was radical, but only on the economy and not on all the other things, the social conservatism that we've missed. And the culture was allowed to be taken over by the left. And the economy was the one thing that radical progress was made on, depending on, I mean, some people might not agree with Thatcher, right? Economics, that's fine. But she certainly did something in that area, but not in so many others. Lady Sarcastro says, history bros, shout out for Bo. And I just wanted to acknowledge Bo and say, yes, hopefully he'll be on the podcast soon. This is where I realize I haven't eaten anything, so we need to press on or I'll never get to the end.
You'll expire.
Jacob, any comment?
Yeah, so I think Mick's completely right that the overriding kind of priority has to be to avoid, I mean, you asked, are they going to make deals, are the Tories going to try and make deals with reform, etc. If you've got if what is true, if what's been described as true, that you've got not just a need for a change in government, but a kind of systemic crisis, a real need for a wholesale change. The absolute priority has got to be avoiding making deals with the Tories, avoiding making deals with anyone, because only an external force is capable of the kind of widespread change that's really, really needed. And I'd add, and you asking about the Tory party conference? Can the Tories find a good leader? All the rest of it. Just the degree to which any of the possible kind of candidates that the Tory party could put forward are implicated in this is illustrated quite well by the fact that so many of the names that are thrown about have either been in one of these disastrous Tory governments for some time or presided over significant disasters. I mean, for people in the audience who might not be aware, but one of the most shocking things seems to happen almost every day now, but that we're still dealing with the fallout of an enormous conspiracy that the British government, propagated by the Conservatives and by the Labour Party, took part in to fly Afghani soldiers and dependents and all the rest of it into the UK, house them, feed
terrorists.
them. Yeah, and many of them which are terrorists, right? And this was it wasn't just a system they came up with. They then came up with an incredible legal device to keep it secret from the public and went to court time and time again to make sure that nobody could even talk about this, right? The degree to which this class is desperate to insulate itself from any amount of criticism, from any amount of publicity, that's an illustration of the need for a wholesale change. And then just one final point, which is that really important, as you say, Dominic, that there's a plan. But I think one of the lessons we might learn from the failure of the Liz Truss moment was also you've got to be open and public about the plan. You've got to prepare people for what's necessary. You've got to start talking about it openly, that we're going to be doing this, that, and the other, not just so you don't scare the markets, but also so that you win the kind of public support for what is going to be a really difficult few weeks, months, years, not just in terms of the economy, but in terms of the sheer kind of courage and effort that's going to be needed to implement these changes.
Yeah, I strongly agree. The only way really is there needs to be a public, detailed description in advance of the election saying, this is the scale of the problem, this is how we're actually going to control the government to do it, this is what it means in Whitehall terms for a government to control the government for the first time in decades. And you need to have a democratic mandate for that, so that then when you put legislation through, because remember also, because of the evolution of the judicial system and particularly how judicial review now works, all of this stuff will be challenged by the left in the courts. And that will itself require a kind of like parallel or meta battle whereby you change how judicial review works, you potentially change how the Supreme Court works. You need primary legislation to control parts of the Whitehall system, and you're going to have to get the House of Lords to go along with it and all of these things. So there's going to be a big constitutional battle in the first 12 months. A new regime will need to introduce legislation immediately, push it through Parliament, push it through the House of Lords, and then deal with the lawfare that will come back at you. And to get all of that done will require a clear democratic mandate.
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. And of course, Liz Truss didn't have any democratic mandate. Not only did she keep her plan secret, but she didn't have any democratic mandate to implement anything. So, but that's very, very key. But just I wanted to make one point about, I forgot about the Tories, and as a source of wisdom on many things in the world today, Donald Trump, when he was in Scotland, in that hilarious cameo of him with Starmer next to him, Trump like the King of Scotland and Starmer like some kind of serf in attendance to him. And Trump was kind of lecturing Starmer about what he needed to do. He said, it's obviously is a two-horse race going, a two-party thing, Labour and Reform. And if you want to win, what you got to do is cut immigration, cut taxes and stop immigration, which is basically telling Starmer you can't win because you can't do either of those things. But what was fascinating about it was the Conservative Party or the Tories never entered into that conversation, never crossed Trump's mind as even a player in the next general election. And the fact that the support for the Tories is now lower than it was in their terrible, historically bad election results last year, it tells you everything you need to know. So I think Trump got that right in terms of it being the Tories are out of the race.
I mean, Trump said Nigel, from my recollection, not really Reform. I don't think he talks in those terms, does he? He just knows Nigel. Yeah. But he did say that, words to that effect, and just no idea about Kemi. No, I didn't mention the Tories. And of course, then Vance only met with Jenrick, didn't he, and Farage, but not Kemi recently. She said she had a scheduling issue, and it's like, but that's going to be terrible PR if nothing else. I mean, maybe a scheduling issue was she was not out of bed, as Cummings always claims. She just gets up late. She, completely lazy, just looks at her iPhone, playing games on her iPad, completely checked out. So you know, why didn't she meet Vance? That's terrible. But yeah, they've just lost everything. They've completely. It's incredible, really.
They've imploded.
Yeah, but it imploded's even sort of too strong because it was an implosion. But then the Kemi era sort of feels like a kind of just a wet, just a sort of petering out, doesn't it? Because they picked someone who, while she may be perfectly good at something, like she went to Epping, which was good, but she was sat there making notes in a little sort of jotter, and there's just something about the way she was doing it. I just thought Kemi's just not a leader.
No,
and it's not really even her fault. She just isn't. She's just not the leader. You know, even though she's nominally the leader, no one believes she is. Vance is meeting Jenrick, and it's just we've got to start again because. And they say in here, you know, obviously Starmer and Kemi they don't have proper leaders. So
yeah.
You know.
Well, she's that, as I say, that kind of boilerplate politician that they thought they needed to emulate from the Blair era. And, you know, she doesn't have, as you say, the ability to do anything because that's, in a sense, how she's been brought up politically. And the context of those leaders in the Blair era are that they arrived out of the changes that Blair made in the kind of way that Dominic Cummings is alluding to here. I mean, you know, I don't want to be naughty and use phrases like we need to sort of, you know, have some sort of act that enables us to do things. I can't think of a phrase for it, but, you know, there does perhaps need to be some sort of immediate legislation that puts a hold on, as people are commenting in the chat, the lawfare. You know, there is perhaps going to have to be, you know, some tears before bedtime, some civil servants who think they can mess us around, or some activist lawyers who think they can kind of forestall the changes that are coming. Perhaps something has to happen to put the kibosh on that and say, enough, no, you're going to be completely disempowered. You're not going to get your payouts and your compensation. You're not going to tie us up in red tape and suing the government over this or that. We're just going to have an act to say that this is a kind of national emergency moment. We need to change things radically, and we can't be waylaid by the niceties of this idea of we are a nation of laws, which essentially are being weaponized to endlessly confound the possibility of the will of the people vested in its elected representatives to govern in their interest.
Yeah, as Starkey said in my interview, sorry to keep mentioning it, he said the Parliament now is just a theatre. It's just a theatre because they don't have any power. And it's all in the hands of these quangos, and it's in these conventions and these activist judges and so on. Someone in the chat says Kemi's a toff. Well, no, she's not, because that's an old English thing. I mean, Boris might be a toff. Peter Hitchens did a documentary on Cameron called The Toff at the Top. Kemi's something much stranger. She's a part of multiculturalism. She's a sort of post-empire kind of, you know, quite a strange phenomenon, really. She came over from Nigeria, was used to having money in Nigeria, didn't like the way she was treated in Britain, and couldn't get anywhere. Eventually finds the Tory party, and suddenly that's her home, and she's treated there with a kind of respect and reverence that she was used to from Nigeria. And she goes, okay, this is my thing. Then in a kind of school project way, she makes the Tories a project. She's the kind of girl that gets the A because she worked hard. She boasted about snitching in school, which was bizarre. It's not something we would do in England. You wouldn't boast about grassing, but she did do that. She said she got someone expelled from her school. So she's a kind of teacher's pet type, and she came over, was like, why am I not being respected here? And then she's like, oh, the Tories. And then she realized, oh, the Tories are the thing. But it's all it's all odd and alien. That's why she doesn't know what sandwiches are or Halloween, because she's from Nigeria. God bless her. I mean, she came here, she left immediately and lived the first 16 years in Nigeria. So she is a Nigerian in basically every way, unless you believe in the old magic sword, just touched down on the soil. And that's had a big impact. It just, I'm afraid it does have an impact, because it kind of comes across in everything she does. But apart from that, she's just not grasped it. And apart from that, she's just not a leader. But hardly anyone is. I always say it's not like a big diss. Hardly anyone is leader and able to lead a big political party. I mean, it's just how many people. And what's crazy now is that they don't have anyone else. They don't have anyone. And the only person they have is Jenrick. And you look at Jenrick. If you actually look at Jenrick before Ozempic, there was a picture of him the other day I saw standing next to someone when he was, I can't remember who he was standing next to now, but it was pre-Ozempic Jenrick, and he looked totally different. He looked kind of bad, and he just looked, he was sort of tubby and it was small, and it just looked terrible. He looked kind of like Matt Luke or something. It wasn't good. And you just thought, oh, I'm not sure that guy's a leader. Maybe now he's changed genuinely. He's got the Ozempic. He's been on the diet as well, and he's now doing the good videos. So maybe he has changed. He's got a good team. But when I looked at that picture of him, I thought, I'm not sure that's the guy either. I know that sounds ridiculous, but you know, a lot of this is instinctive, isn't it? It's like Boris has charisma, Farage has the charisma. Tories don't have anyone actually, and that's why AA was saying bring in Rupert Lowe, because he has got something.
Yes. That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on that. There was a kind of a standard issue Tory for a while. A number of them seemed to be interchangeable. They were all kind of meaty in the face, and they all had, particularly coiffed hair and a certain sort of piggy-eyed, untrustworthy look about them, in my view, that kind of infected the party. It made them look, I mean, they all kind of. It's like Boris. They all kind of look like, pictures you see of the Duke of Marlborough, sort of, putting down the scum in the Jacobite rebellion, in the 18th century. This kind of de haut en bas, the high and mighty kind of sort of aristocratic attitude, and a lot of those Tories seem to have that kind of look now. It's not like the sort of look of the Thatcherite Tory party in the 80s, where they all seem to be kind of, those kind of dweeby characters with the big glasses and the floppy hair. They all seem to be sort of, very, very well fed, sort of demi-aristocracy. And it just doesn't come across as a great look, that machine politician look of the post-Blair era. A bit too self-satisfied.
Agreed. Yeah, give me the weird-looking freaks of the Thatcher era, the sort of Douglas Hurd. I mean, Heseltine looked all right, but they all looked a bit bonkers, as you say. They all partly it was just the 70s, big glasses, but
have some dashing eccentrics rather than these kinds of yes men.
They look like they were probably smart and very posh, and that's what we want. But yeah, we've lost that. I'm not sure. I kind of like Jemmett, but I'm not sure. It's Tories are done. Tories are done. It's like they say here, completely crackers finished, Potemkin done.
Yeah, it's too late.
Big picture for the Conservative Party, man. Now, migration has already been mentioned, and I think one of the kind of biggest threats, I mean, generally the West is facing, is migration. And I was always surprised how Britain wasn't able to be more effective on migration. You're an island, so we're here in Hungary. We're a landlocked nation, and our government built a fence on the border to stop the million people trying to get in on the southern border. Even though, as I said, it's a landlocked country. So for you guys, it will be much easier. And Dominic already kind of touched upon the legal barriers. I mean, the Supreme Court in the UK, I personally think is like, I mean, completely alien to the British constitutional system. But also, I think the courage is missing in the end, because Hungary is still a EU member state. We are paying actually a fine to the EU every day because of our migration policy. So we are in the courts. We are being constantly attacked. But as I said, I mean, you're an island. At least you're not in the European Union. You don't have the European Court of Justice anymore. You still have the Human Rights Courts, which is I mean, that's a big failure of Theresa May, that she couldn't get out of that.
But you've got a government that actually wants to deal with it. And the core of this, so we had the 2019 election. We said in the 2019 election, very explicitly, we are going to have a system for immigration like the Australian point system, and that's going to mean that for a very small number of extremely high skilled people like professors of physics or whatever, low friction for you. But we're going to really try and we're going to massively reduce unskilled and low skilled immigration. We said that explicitly in the election campaign. In January 2020, we actually started to implement that. And I had meetings with the Home Office about building the exact border control system finally, so that Britain could count in everybody and count them out, and also count in and out things physically in the border IT system, etc. All of that work started in 2020. After we left, the Vote Leave team left in November 2020. In 2021, Boris and Sunak dismantled the whole thing. They even flipped the definition of high-skilled immigration and just made it low-skilled social care workers from Africa. Right, completely insane. And so, yes, there's been a complete failure on asylum seekers and the stupid boats and illegal immigration, but also most of the people coming in was deliberate and legal, because the Conservative Party said, we actually want to do this. And if you see, even after these extraordinary numbers came out, and even after voters all over the country saying, my sister can't get a doctor's appointment, this is a complete disaster, Boris and minister after minister from the Tory party went on TV and defended it and said, no, this was the right thing to do, and we're happy that we did it. Very similarly, in the last couple of weeks, after the Afghan debacle that was kept secret, also leaked out into the media because the court injunction stopped. As discussed before, Ben Wallace and all of these Secretary of State for Defense, all these other ministers literally went on TV and said they were proud of it, proud of the secret process flying over Taliban terrorists. So that really sums up. It's important to realize a lot of what you see is incompetence, but a lot of it isn't incompetence. A lot of it is Conservative Party figures wanted to do these things and remain proud of what they did. And that is crucial to remember when you're thinking about the evolution of the next few years in South Africa. I'll give you an example today, right?
Because he's going to go on. I just wanted to stop because, yes, Ben Wallace, we could not betray Afghan allies who fought alongside us. This was in the Telegraph. And obviously they don't write the headlines, but this was the gist of the piece, 15th of July, 2025. I make no apology for applying to the court for an injunction. It was not a cover-up. Incredibly, he did defend it. And I remember Grant Shapps defending it on Twitter. Incredible. One of the most appalling cover-ups is bringing in thousands of Afghans. And you defend it. So he's right. I mean, they actually believe in this stuff. They make no apology for it. Absolutely incredible. And no wonder Cummings said so. He said completely insane. And he also said complete failure and complete disaster. He went for it all there. There's another thing he does there where he goes, no. He does this. That's quite a interesting one to get for the accent. But anyway, on the main point though, yeah, they're actually proud of it.
Yeah. I mean, again, like that quote I had earlier about the Conservative Party and its relation to power, it is a kind of neutral thing. And in a way, you can get carried away with this idea of, oh, such and such is evil and the Tories are evil. And I think Cummings talks about this maybe in one of the other interviews, but you've just got to accept they genuinely believe in these things because they've got a different set of incentives and a different set of convictions, which, are bedded in that kind of liberal worldview that they inherited from the dissent from the Blair government, which they believe, if you like, will be the right thing to do and will earn them good optics points. But their priorities are out of all proportion with what the country is interested in actually achieving, and it's become this sense that what they're doing is an end in itself to portray themselves as an effective government with a lot of high-minded values. I mean, I'm afraid in the end, things like wars are dirty, messy, tragic business, and the idea that we then have to kind of palliate all of the ills that come out of war by the act of sacrificing our own country to do so. You may just have to give it a miss and say, well, I'm sorry, we can't take in everyone from Afghanistan who might have helped British forces, but perhaps we shouldn't have let their names out to the Taliban so they could be hunted down and killed. Perhaps we should have just been a little bit more competent with our data protection. But the solution is not to say that we bring everybody over here, because that would be the highly principled thing to do, because there's an essential discorrelation with the sense of what their electors want in their constituencies that they just somehow can't see. They do believe in this stuff, but the purposes to which the system directs itself has evil outcomes as we see it from our point of view. They think it's completely legitimate.
Yeah, because they're operating from a completely different paradigm. And on a mild tangent, this became apparent today. Mr. Beast said, just did my first stream and we raised over 12 million for charity. Not quite as much raised on our stream, but the replies to this were so brutal. I can't read any of them out. But my point is, even something like charity, right? You talk about Afghans, like, oh yeah, let's be charitable towards the Afghans. And it's like, no, let's not. But in Ben Wallace's mind, he's from the boomer, and people get annoyed when you say boomer, but the post-war liberal idea of like, yes, of course we give charity to Afghans or housing or whatever the word is, refuge, asylum. But no, those are the old paradigms. And now just the idea, it's quite hard to imagine when me or I don't know when you grew up exactly, Simon, certainly when I grew up, the idea of like, you gave money to Africa, or I mean, I may not have done it, but it was comic relief and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Fairly generic stuff, like fairly sort of universally agreed upon. Now, there might have been some debate about, does it really get to them, blah, blah, blah. But now it's just absolute hatred. Because it's like, why? What are you doing? And maybe this is just on my part of Twitter, but I said give it to working class English boys just for a bit of fun as well. But that's just one little example of a paradigm that's sort of things that were just so accepted that have completely shifted. So they infuriate us constantly, but they, as you sort of say, they don't really know they're doing it. They're saying something virtuous from their paradigm that in ours seems absolutely repulsive.
Yeah. Agreed.
Okay, I didn't want to speak for you, but luckily you agree.
Right? The Online Safety Act is now being applied. The first stage of it is now being applied in Britain, which means that increasingly in Britain you see stuff on Twitter is censored, and you can't read it. Oh, you'd think, obviously, Kemi Badenoch, the new leader of the Conservative Party, will be all over TV saying that this is ludicrous and we're going to change it and blah, blah. No, tumbleweed blowing. Why? Because Kemi, along with most of the Tory MPs, are proud of bringing in this exact act, which is now being used by Labour for censorship. So this is very important, I think, to keep in mind when you're thinking about the next few years. The mainstream of the Conservative Party is essentially has been and remains indistinguishable from Labour and the Lib Dems and the far left on many of the most important issues.
Yeah, even the far left.
I just add two things to the migration story that have really accelerated and made lots of these problems worse, I think. One is that the way the British economy is set up is meant that it's become, even in the medium term, it's kind of disastrous, the numbers of people that are being imported, but politicians have been able to use mass low-skill immigration to solve specific problems, like the social care problem, and generally the economy runs on low-skill migration, like some kind of
Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, like some kind of Ponzi scheme. You need more and more and more every time to make the system work, and so that's really exciting. It's become an easy way out of avoiding difficult conversations about the economy to import more people. And secondly is the way in which, through a strange mix of the courts and ideology, almost everybody involved in government and the state seems to make no distinction between British people who live and work in Britain and anybody else anywhere in the world. And so the whole system is almost set up in a way that anybody in the world has just as much right to enjoy the protections of British constitutional law and the opportunities that there still are in Britain to find work and make a family and all the rest of it. And people just seem to think that there's no difference at all between somebody who's a native Brit who lives in Britain and someone anywhere else in the world, which is why you can have a situation like in the Afghan debacle, where the state seemed to believe its overriding priority. Another word of Ben was like, we have a response. My first priority, I think he said, was to those people in Afghanistan, these Afghani terrorists, his first priority. And so people have completely flipped and lost any sense that their job as politicians is to present the interests of British people first and foremost, even if that means sometimes we have to say, sorry, you live in a nasty situation, but we have to take the interests of our country really seriously. And the degree to which that mindset, that ideology is embedded right across the political class and the institutions is really profound. And one of the things that a new government, a reform government, have to do is from day one say, whether it's required some kind of constitutional amendment or whatever, but make clear in a determinative and kind of proud sense that the job of a British government is to represent the interests of British people. And it seems mad that you might need to even say that, but whether we have to go off and get civil servants to sign an oath or something, but you need a demonstration that from now on things change and that the job of a government and of the institutions of Britain is to put British people first.
Yeah. I mean, it's a good point. It's incredible, isn't it? The idea of my first priority is Afghans, and it's why people all the time can't see any difference between migrant crime and our crime. They say, well, what about white people? They do. One, they can't understand per capita, but they also can't understand why it might be worse and less moral to bring in people committing crimes than the crimes that you have to deal with your native population. But they see no distinction, incredibly, but they don't. And Jacob there nailed it. What were you going to say?
No, that's it. It's one of the fundamental problems is this notion of extending our generosity without asking us. It's as if Nick Dixon has a party and he says, Simon, would you like to come over? I'm having a party, just a few friends, a few drinks. Yeah, great. And I turn up at the door and I say, oh, Nick, you don't mind? I've brought 30 friends with me. Is that okay? You're okay with that, aren't you? That's fine, isn't it? And it essentially, like he says, it becomes a Ponzi scheme because Nick then says to me, well, Simon, you've brought 30 friends and they've drunk all the beer. And I say, well, I'll bring another 30 friends and they'll bring some more beer. And so the party will then kind of, it'll feed itself that way. That's the sort of ridiculous reasoning that you've got. It's this sense that they do these things for this kind of moral gratification that that ends in a phrase I like to sort of use, that they are the sorts of people who, they don't care about if it's going to affect you locally. Yeah, they're the sort of people who like to rise above other people's problems.
Great phrase. And yeah, that's a great phrase. And I really liked your analogy there about the beer and the party, because that will stick in my mind. Yeah, because Paul Morland's talked about this on my podcast and elsewhere. The Ponzi scheme, the fact that the immigrants get old and need care themselves and so on, it's completely ridiculous. But yeah, of course they bring and they take resources and services, as you've implied with your beer analogy. Very, very good.
Basic courtesy. You wouldn't dream to presume on people, but they continually presume upon us.
Yes. Right, we're nearly at the end. I mean, I feel like a lightweight. I mean, Lotus Eaters really took it out of me in my general week. But we did a piece on Lotus yesterday about Hassan Thingy, that annoying Turkish streamer, and he does like 10 hours a day. He says he's completely addicted. He just streams for 10 hours a day. It's completely insane. Completely crackers.
It's even, I mean, that's all correct, but you can see it's even more extreme in the sense that any element in Britain which tries to argue the opposite is immediately labelled that. So if things that I've just said are labelled by the mainstream in Westminster as obviously fascist, obviously far right. So something which would be completely uncontentious even 30 years ago in Britain, that obviously the first duty of the British government is to British people, is itself now defined as essentially a fascist point of view. And you can see increasingly, there's a kind of logic to what they say, that lots of the people, you can see retired civil servants on Twitter and whatnot, just very openly state, literally, the MP should explain to the British public that we have no actual right to inhabit this island. It's just a fluke of history. We have no more right to be here than anybody else at any other corner of the earth. And what we need is a political force that just explains that to the British and explains that they're just going to have to put up with essentially infinite immigration, and that's a good thing, and any opposition to that is fascist. And it may seem like that what I'm saying is like too extreme to be true, but you can see ex-officials argue this very openly now in the public, in public debate.
That's your money shot.
There are so many things now which...
Yeah, I mean, there it is. They would openly argue that we have no particular right to this island, aka our only home. Yeah, that is their view. Completely, as he says, completely. He said it should have been completely uncontentious, but now it isn't. What do you do when you're up against traitors of that magnitude?
Well, the problem is it's framed in their minds with benign paternalism. Again, to go back to my other life on the Academic Agent channel, Adam Curtis talks about this point of divergence in the 70s, where the liberal classes responded to the election of Thatcher, and they felt very bitten by it. They felt, these. It was exemplified in an anecdote in one of his documentaries where Philip Gould, the Labour strategist, was talking at the time before Blair came in, when they were sort of strategizing how to get Labour back into government. And he recalls a conversation he said with a sort of a top Labour person and his wife. And, I suspect it's probably someone like Glenys Kinnock or someone like that. But this person apparently said, what do we do with, these terrible working class people? All they do is they read The Sun and they vote against us. We give them all this education and all this stuff, and all they do is just crap in our face, And he said at that point he realized the sort of fundamental arrogance of this kind of paternalistic worldview that that people in this sort of elite tier of society have. We're doing all these things for you. Just be grateful that we're doing these things for you. Can't you just be grateful? Can't you just vote for us because we've given you a few baubles?
Yeah. But now there's not even any baubles left, really. It's just a terrible economy.
There never were.
Immigration, crime, services in the toilet, can't buy a house. It's hit the fan though now, so where there's no incentive, is there?
No.
Oh well. Let's see how it ends. Not the country. this interview, but maybe both.
Too extreme to be true, but that is actually what they're saying. You couldn't have imagined it happening 10 years ago. To go back, I agree with everything that's been said. To go back to your original question, Britain is an island, and so it is fundamentally, in the end, a question of political will, I think. We need a government that has the courage of its convictions, and there's two sides to that. One is you have to have convictions. You have to actually believe in national sovereignty and putting Britain first, and that we haven't had. Well, I don't know. We can debate how far back you have to go to find such a government. And secondly, you have to have the courage to implement that and to not be put off by being accused of being far right, fascist or anything else, and to actually stick to your guns. And then, in an island, we ought to be able to protect ourselves and deal with our borders. And I think Hungary is a fantastic example of what a government with the courage of its convictions can do in terms of protecting its national sovereignty and its borders. If we look at what's happening now in Greece, Greece is still a member of the European Union, is still signed up to the European Convention on Human Rights, and is sending all of its boat migrants back to Turkey in very uncompromising fashion. So it can be done, but we need a complete and utter change of the political system, a government that has the courage of its convictions. That begins, and I think this is where Nigel's programme is clear. It begins by saying we've got to get out of the European Convention of Human Rights, and we've got to remove the Human Rights Act in Britain, which writes the European Convention of Human Rights into British law. So it's not just a European law, it's actually in domestic law, and that's what the Supreme Court uses to override Parliament in so many ways now. So that's a fundamental kind of starting point.
I'm sorry, gentlemen, I got a clear sign that we have to wrap the panel up. So please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists, Dominic, Jacob, Mick. Thank you for being here this early hour after partying yesterday. So thank you and wish you a great day. The audience as well. Thank you again.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
So on that last point, Greece getting rid of their immigrants, they're also gaining millionaires. Did you see this graph? Global millionaire migration in 2025. No. Yeah, I mean, mostly they're going to United Arab Emirates, who are getting 9.8 thousand millionaires in 2025. United States 7.5 thousand, but Italy 3.6. Why not? Nice weather, probably fairly cheap. Switzerland 3K, Saudi Arabia 2.4, Singapore 1.6. But these are interesting. Portugal 1.4, Greece 1.2. And then Canada and Australia are getting 1K. Then it goes into the minuses of people who are losing them. Israel 350, Germany 400, Spain 500, France 800, Brazil 1.2K, Russia 1.5K, South Korea 2.4K, India 3.5K, China 7.8K, United Kingdom 16.5 thousand millionaires gone. Yeah. So they're even coming back to these places like but it's a terrible story for Europe, and you see that it's a terrible story for like UAE is giving us their people they don't want. But you do see even Greece sees, you just see like, why are we doing so badly on all metrics? Terrifying stuff.
Yeah. On that point that he was making there, he was beginning to, that last chap, I know he was probably, his heart was in the right place, but when he was repeating that phrase, it was beginning to become a little like, your Starmer, courage of our convictions, he kept repeating the courage of our convictions, or the government has to have the courage of its convictions. Again, there's a danger in that phrase, because that always, to me, echoes this sense that sincerity has become a sort of political currency, despite what you might actually do. It goes back to me to things like Tony Blair going into Iraq and in retrospect, the disaster of that war, and saying things like, I did really believe in what I was doing. So that makes it all okay. This thing of trotting out this cliche of having, governments having this sincerity. I mean, Keir Starmer can come in and wreck the place and say, well, I really believed in what I was doing. So does that count for something? No, it doesn't. We don't just want you to have courage of convictions. We want you to have the right ideas and then just do them. And actually, you don't need to advertise that you've got the courage of your convictions.
Yeah, good point. I'm trying to bring up this global millionaire thing, and I can't get it high res enough that you could see it. So never mind. But it was doing the rounds on Twitter. I know I got a bit obsessed with that at the end. But yeah, courage and convictions isn't really enough. I mean, he was making the case, Mick, wasn't he, for reform throughout? But I don't know if he really, I don't know if he really sold it to me.
He seemed very hesitant and sort of held in. Do you know what I mean? Sort of, like he was kind of worried that he could say something wrong at any second, and he looked very pent up and got to be careful what I say, kind of thing. Well, I think the time for that is past. They need to be kind of pretty out there and pretty direct at this point and say, look, cut the rubbish. This is what we need to be to and there's no kind of hedging it round with these nice kind of cotton wool optical phrases like, where you've got to have the courage of your convictions.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see what happens when reform don't fix anything. Should we read some of these super chats? Thank you very much, everyone. Lawrence, AJ98 we dealt with at the start, so that's that one. Thank you very much. Lawrence, Cummings is good at campaigning and diagnosing problems, but hopeless at solving them. His actions during COVID reveal that when it matters, he loses his head. IMO. Yeah, some certainly disagree with him over lockdowns in my audience, definitely. I obviously disagree with him as well. COVID, obviously, you can understand why someone might lose their mind a bit in a completely bizarre situation. And it was insane and totally absurd, the response. And have you seen that Christians, people signing up to be Christians among the young people, 18 to 24 or something, have gone up about 4 times post-lockdown, and everyone was replying to it going, this could be Muslims. The article was specifically about people believing God, but it was actually about becoming Christian. And it was in 2021 following, and the article even said it once freed from lockdowns. So belief in God among 18 to 24-year-olds has tripled in 4 years, and it's specifically Christian. So 16% in 2021, 45% in 2025. And I imagine it was the emergence of sort of the regime being clearly evil, and also the complete lack of meaning when you're in lockdown and other things, of course. But anyway, that was a slight digression. But Cummings, I don't know. You don't know what problems he did solve when he was there, to be fair. You don't know what he did exactly. And if you read up on the Leave campaign, his work was pretty impressive there. But certainly I disagreed on lockdown. Any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't want to sort of understate or portray that I don't understand people's concerns about what happened during lockdown. I suspect everybody here, we all hated it, and the consequences of the medical emergency and treatments administered during that time shouldn't ever be understated or forgotten, especially if it had physical consequences for people who people knew and loved at the extreme end, and just the pure curtailment of liberty at the broad end for most of us. But I take the sort of cold-eyed political view that we do over on Academic Agents channel that COVID is a dead issue politically now. It was iniquity. It happened. It should not happen. And Cummings was an agent who effected the egregious measures based on the incentives that were being responded to at the time, and based on the beliefs he had in data-driven policy, which I find highly suspect in the case of Neil Ferguson, and the projections, the wild projections that were clearly defied by examples of countries like Sweden. But I think the idea of hating on Cummings, as Americans would say, because of that is kind of by its sell-by date now. The interest we have in Cummings, I suspect, is because he is a diagnostic for the problems of government itself. And whatever his past actions were, I think we have to kind of just put that to one side. That's some time ago now, and we have to move on and just get to, if you like, the winning state, the solution that optimizes the kind of good governance that we want to see, taking on board the things he's pointing out about the realities of Westminster. But I'm sorry to say that clinging on to the sense of injustice from the COVID time, I hated it as much as, if not more than, many people, and I got into all sorts of situations during that time because of how I stood against it myself. But the reality is Cummings is giving valuable sort of insight into what needs to be done, and we hope the parties that can make good on that capitalize on that knowledge and the knowledge of other people as well, not just Cummings, if it can be learned how you can go in and deactivate the system protections that will inevitably face a government on the first day. You've got to be able to have some sort of way of overriding their ability to resist. You know, that quote he had in that interview of talking to a civil servant who says, Dominic, you're like you're like an infection, and we're like the antibodies trying to eject you from the system.
Yes, I remember that one. Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. I also had lots of problems in that time. Well, my job couldn't operate for one thing. I was pressured into taking the treatment, but of course didn't, and therefore had to go against my family and all sorts of things. But yes, Cummings just too useful to cling on to that. Personally, I agree with that as well. Nigel Smith, this is for the Pacino chat. Thank you, Nigel. That's quite generous just for that Pacino chat, actually. T-Dog, Nick, you need a nickname. I would suggest the Dixon addiction. Oh, the Dixon addiction, or perhaps Nick the Greek. Funny you should say that, T-Dog. I was thinking today, I mean, I used to be called the Big Dog on headliners, as someone else pointed out. But I was also thinking about my fans, what they should be called, because I'm always quite impressed how the Swifties and Groypers will swarm and crush opponents. And I already have some people that will do that, but I think I need an official name for them. I thought of Nickettes, the Dicks with an X, Dick's Squad with an X, Dick's Army. These are just some ideas I thought of today. Maybe it should be organic. I don't know.
I could come up with a suggestion, but it would sound like another N word.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry. I wouldn't do that on your stream.
Do you have a nickname, Simon?
No. I'm not likable enough for people to give me a nickname.
Makes sense. Nigel, we all had him at school, although I didn't actually. Mine was just my surname said in a sort of aggressive manner. Oh yeah, and I read that one before. Nigel, Nick used to be called the Big Dog. I think we should bring that back. Yeah, possibly. He also says, hell is other people, John Paul Sartre. I think Nick could have written this. Yeah, that is classic. Dixon. T-Dog. Simon, I lived in Sydney for 8 years. The UK, I felt, was much more free than... sorry, I'll start again. Simon, I lived in Sydney for 8 years. The UK, I felt, was much more free than the UK. Hang on.
I couldn't make sense of that one. Does he mean the Australia was freer than the UK, or the UK was freer
Yeah, probably.
than
Just
Australia?
typed quickly. They don't like dogs off the collar, and they love cars in the road always pointing the same way.
I mean, Australia is kind of quite, ready to be hidebound by petty regulation. This is why you saw what happened in the medical emergency era happen, that they are so pettifogging that they will jump on people for the slightest infraction of some stupid, tiny little rules. I mean, one of the things that activated me politically was in the early 90s was they introduced a law mandating everybody had to wear bicycle helmets. And I was an avid cyclist, and I just, I didn't feel the need for a bicycle helmet. I was an adult, and I just felt like, why are you treating us like 12-year-olds? I'll make a decision about whether I want to wear a bicycle helmet. But it was just the sort of way of the Australian governance style at the time. We don't like something, we ban it, or we enforce something. There was no conversation about it. There was just a kind of people bending over backwards to find ways to agree with it.
Absolutely, how they are.
Yeah. I mean, I've had pushback on it. People have said, oh, well, you're not much better in England, are you? Well, no, we're struggling with problems in England as well. But I felt, as I say, I just felt Australia was much more biddable, the Australian population. The Brits will complain and grouse about things and maybe get a bit argy-bargy on the street sometimes. But in Australia, there's actually such an intense social taboo against speaking out about, against being, if you're being politically disagreeable, it'll almost be suppressed by the force of, you're killing the buzz, man. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, I noticed it from the bizarre and absurd reason of watching SAS Who Dares Wins Australia, and the difference with the Australian teams in that show, where it was extraordinary. They were so authoritarian. They were so like, mate, you've been a bit of a drongo, whatever it is, but they're just like, like, you're not completely mate, you're not completely conforming at all times. And I was just like, oh, they're just so authoritarian in nature. It was weird, man.
It is kind of weird hectoring. I will just say I did have a nickname. A friend of mine calls me Skippy, partly because I lived in Australia and partly because I'm always in and out of skips, like just rescuing old junk that's of worth.
In and out of skips.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Simon Skippy because he lives in skips.
Love a skip.
Interesting. Nigel, how can anyone not see how establishment reform are? It's embarrassing, as I read before. Yeah. And actually, they're quite thick, some of them. Not all of them, of course. But I wrote such an obvious parody the other day on Twitter, such an obvious parody of the left saying London is safe and vibrant. I've literally said I walk around every night at 2 a.m. with my phone out shouting, "Take it, I'm vulnerable." And the only time anyone's ever come up to me was to tell me how to make the perfect jerk chicken. And if London is safe and vibrant, if you don't agree, you're actual scum. It was something like that. It's like,
Yeah.
guys, if you can't tell that's a joke, there's something seriously wrong with your brain. And two people that couldn't had reform in their banner on Twitter. And I was like, interesting. Your brain on reform. One of them even said, yeah, not funny for the women and blah, blah, who've been assaulted. So it's like, yeah, that's the point of satire. That is my target, that the left is ignoring those people. That's how satire works, you unbelievable moron. It's actually quite hard to be a reasonably smart person in current year. So yeah, all reform people are dumb. Proper Horror Show, off topic, but Nick recommended The Drop 2014 recently. Great film. What are the panel's favorite horror movies? Panel's quite strong for just two people, but yeah, I am Proper Horror Show. Funny you should say that. You might not like this given your nom de plume. Is that right? Or is it nom? Yeah. Well, I don't watch horror. I hate horror. I think horror is immoral. I absolutely can't stand it. I get incredibly scared, and I just take it incredibly seriously and realistically. And I don't understand how people. I think anyone who watches it is so desensitized, and there's something kind of slightly wrong with them, actually. So that's my view on horror. Unless you count like psychological horror, like things like maybe some David Lynch thing, or obviously I've seen Jaws if you count that. But I basically do not watch horror and don't approve of it. But I love all other films, of course, obviously made before the woke era. What do you think, Simon?
Well, this is a bit of a setup because I know Proper Horror Show very well. In fact, we had lunch today, and Proper Horror Show runs a very interesting YouTube channel, which I urge you to like and subscribe to. And we do analysis of horror films on the channel. And I was someone who was not a horror guy. No, not at all. It's funny because I did take a sort of dismissive attitude to horror in the sense of I thought it's kind of disposable culture in a way, and it just hits a kind of sensation for people who are essentially psychopaths, like you say. It kind of gives people an illicit buzz at blood and sadism. But actually, what Proper Horror Show does is a serious analysis from the right of the methods and moralities of horror films and the sort of the very durable, well-made, interesting horror films. And I urge you to go and check out the channel. We did some great streams where I did some analysis with Proper Horror Show, particularly about folk horror, which I found is a really interesting and quintessentially English genre of horror, not necessarily graphic or
like The
bloody.
Wicker Man.
The Wicker Man. We did Blood on Satan's Claw. I'm very proud of that review that we did, and especially the review we did of a film called A Field in England, which I urge you to go and watch the film and then go and have a listen to our review of it, because I found it a really fascinating film about very germane to the moment about how we retrieve parts of ourselves through this story, which looks like a kind of acid trip during the English Civil War, but it has a sort of deeper legend and meaning underneath it. And I found it really fascinating to research all about the kind of the 17th century belief in the parallel fairy world, where there was a sort of another kingdom, another commonwealth that was going on parallel to real life, and which was a really interesting part of the film. So you go and have a look at it.
Okay, well, you make a good case. I'm sure your channel is very interesting. Unfortunately, I just will never be able to watch horror because it just disturbs me so much. It stays with me the rest of my life. I remember watching Blair Witch Project and having to stay in a house on my own that night in the country, where in the middle of nothing where I'm from. And yes, I can't do it, and I never will. I don't understand how people do it, but it's a different mindset. But you made a good case there for this kind of English horror. Which
would you consider things like ghost stories like too horrific? Because we did sort of things like TV ghost, M.R. James ghost stories at Christmas.
I was going to say M.R. James. Obviously, they were well written and everything. Yeah. I'd be still too scared to read them, but I just don't. I'm not able to detach from it at all. I find it just like incredibly traumatic. Of course, I've watched traumatic films like Come and See. Even now, would I watch those brutal. In my adulthood? I don't know. They're pretty brutal, aren't they? I used to watch a lot of brutal. I used to watch very brutal cinema when I was younger. Yeah, but not horror. But yeah, that's horrific in another sense. And you wonder, but horror I just can't. I can't handle. It's strange, isn't it? But that's how it is.
Come and See was one of the great war films, really, like Das Boot. like Apocalypse Now in a sense, sort of impressionistic, not necessarily literal action orientated war films. Just they go into the madness of war in a
Yeah, but
powerful way.
Apocalypse Now you could watch probably with
Yep.
popcorn, and whereas Come and See is like a full-on experience of just like the way it's shot and the way it's done is just a full-on horrific experience.
Yeah.
You can't really. Yes, I mean the Deer Hunter's pretty bleak. I watched that as a teenager one Saturday night, thinking, "What was I doing here?" That's pretty bleak. But Come and See is on another level. I can't think of many more horrific non-horrors than that.
Yeah. It's intelligent horror that a proper horror show tends to analyze. I mean, there's obviously fans of like slasher horror and violent, bloody gore and all that sort of stuff. But I think I learned from going on the channel that there is an intelligence in the writing of some horror films that speaks to issues in the modern era, and the interpretation that you do brings out what those are on that channel. So
okay, well, it's a pity I'm like that for the sake of this chat, but it's just how I am.
Fair enough.
And it's you could say it's Philistine, but there it is.
We don't want to change you, Nick.
But it's not possible at this stage, really. And then that's just Nigel saying that he has to go. But thanks so much, Nigel, and all the other people for your super chats. And thank you, everyone, for being here. We did another decent chunk there. Luckily, not 4 hours 38, but a decent one. Oh, people are mentioning horrors now. I'm not even going to look at that. I actually can't even look at the names of them. It's that it's just a quirk of me, I suppose. It's what I'm like. But I always think I've got too much empathy. I don't know how people must be able to detach in a way that I can't. I'm involved emotionally in every film I watch. People used to laugh at David Lynch, and I was talking about how and Harriet Lotus agreed with me on this, how it's completely the wrong way to watch Lynch. He's completely sincere. The horrific parts are horrific, and the depictions of love are supposed to be ecstatic, and those people that watch it with a kind of detached irony, I can never understand that. So films of all kinds they don't affect me as much as they used to, because I can't find any really good ones anymore. But when I was younger, they had such massive impact on me. Films like Fight Club or The Matrix or something. Yeah, and I got so involved that I could never watch horror because I'd be so involved and terrified. Anyway,
it's like that line in The Simpsons: "Don't avert your eyes, Lisa. You'll never get desensitized to it."
Nice. And Mark agrees with me, and that's all. Mark says, I agree with Nick. That's all I ever want to hear.
Exactly.
And AR says, thanks, Nick and Simon. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining. I guess hopefully we'll see you. Eraserhead is very dark. I've watched Eraserhead. Hopefully we'll see you all. I don't know if Simon's around next Saturday. Are you around?
Yeah, I'm around and free, and I may be going away in November time to see my mother in Australia, but we'll find people to sub in.
And there's one in a couple of weeks you said you might not be able to do, and actually I might possibly be away in 2 weeks and you might be, but hopefully we'll be around next week.
Yeah.
All right. Oh, brilliant. Someone says excellent stream. Many thanks. It's flowing. Well, I'm so glad. Floydian Slip. That's a clever name. I'm so glad you liked it. Goodbye, Dick's Heads. Hey, yeah, Dick's Heads is a good name. Did I suggest that one? Dick's Heads is good. That's actually the perfect name. Who said that? C. Fowler. Thank you very much. Dick's Heads. The Dick's Heads. Don't say that. The Dick's Heads will swarm you.
That's
what I want, an intimidating following.
I will say there was good. I watched your stream with your podcast with Paul Cox the other day, and it was very good. He was very complimentary about these live streams that we do. He said it was that stream you did on Enoch Powell, it was very good. And Simon, he said, and you cut him off straight away. And I felt he was going to lavish me with praise. He was going to say, and Simon, what a discovery. How brilliant, urbane, witty, etc. And you cut straight over him.
Sorry about that. Bitter. Well, I'll ask him next time what the compliment was going to be.
Absolutely.
Sorry about that. Yes, we did a whole new format where we reacted to videos and stuff. I thought it worked really well. And one of the clips is doing well. I'm going to move towards that format. Paul's never around to do streams, but we did that. We recorded that like a stream, and we responded to clips. So that people really like that.
Yeah.
And we could do something like that here as well. We tend to do one long form thing. Rachel, brilliant. Thanks both. This is becoming essential Saturday night viewing. Thank you very much, Rachel. I've got to stop reading the free chats, though. Then there's no value to the paid chats, though. So I will stop reading these chats. But thank you very much, everyone. And we'll see you hopefully next week. And thank you, Simon. And we've got to completely go. No, I haven't watched The Shining, Mark, but we've got to go because this is it's all a Potemkin pathological system.
Yeah, the stream is about to implode completely. I can't even do it.
Completely implode.
Completely.
Okay. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good evening. Bye bye.